The gate opened and nothing came out of it. I stood in the middle of the summoning floor at Holloway with my hands still burning from the chalk, and behind me 200 people waited with me, and in front of me a hole in the air the size of a door hung there and did absolutely nothing at all. Cold air came through it. That was the whole event. Cold air, and a smell like metal left out in the rain, and under that, very far off, a sound I had no word for. A long flat honk, twice, like a goose made of iron. Then the hole shut with a small polite pop, and I was alone on a floor of white sand in front of the entire college, and somebody laughed, and then everybody did. Archmagus Farron Dask came down off the tier with his hands behind his back. He is a small man with a neat grey beard and a voice that never has to get louder, because everyone else always gets quieter for him. He walked a full circle round my chalk. He crouched. He put 2 fingers inside the ring and held them there, and his eyebrows went up in the way I had been dreading for 4 years. No mana. Not a drop. You drew a gate the size of a barn door, boy, and it cost you nothing. That is the point. That is what I have been trying to tell your examiners since I was 17. My gate does not spend. It borrows. And if it borrows, then the only limit on it is how far it can reach. Dask stood and brushed the sand off his knees and gave me the pitying smile I still see sometimes when I am tired. A gate that costs nothing is a gate that opens onto nothing. That is a hole in your understanding shaped like a door. Empty gate. Write it down. And somebody wrote it down, and my whole life finished in the time it takes to say 2 words. Behind Dask stood Sir Aubrey Lance, who was the college sword, 3rd son of a family with a good name and no money, and who had been waiting 4 years for a reason to put his hands on me. He came forward very politely. Would the empty gate care to try again? No. He put his hand flat on the back of my neck and pushed, and my face went into the white sand, and he set his boot against the side of my head and leaned. Not hard. Just hard enough that everyone could see the shape of it, and just long enough that I could taste chalk. Get up. You are holding up the next candidate. They walked me out through the yard where the others were still working. A girl from ENN had a fire lizard curled on her wrist. A boy I had shared a room with for 2 winters had a stone hound the size of a pony and would not look at me. Somebody had already chalked the word empty across my study door. At the gatehouse they handed me my things in a sack. 1 coat. 1 knife. 1 book of my own notes, which Dask had annotated in the margins with the word no, 11 separate times. Then they gave me 2 things I had not asked for. 2 elf women came out of the kitchen yard carrying bundles, and the warden ticked them off a slate. They were mine now, since they had been bought for the college out of the same fund that paid my board, and the college was closing that fund today. The taller one looked at me the way you look at weather. Burn scar down the back of one hand, hair the color of wet straw, maybe 25. Do you mean to sell us at Marrow Ford, or further on? I do not mean to sell anybody. Then you are poorer than you look. She picked up her bundle, and that was Ilna, and that is more or less how she has spoken to me every day since. The other one was younger and had not stopped shaking since she came through the door. Sora. She had been the herb woman's girl, and she had stolen a satchel of dried things on her way out, and she apologized for stealing it 4 separate times before we reached the road. So that was the sum of me at 22. 1 coat, 1 knife, 1 book full of the word no, and 2 women the crown had thrown out with the kitchen scraps. We walked north, because north is the direction nobody argues about. It took 11 days. We ate turnips out of a field near Cad, and a hedgehog Ilna killed with a rock and did not apologize for, and on the 7th day it rained for 16 hours and Sura took a fever and we sat under a wall until it broke. On the 9th day a carter gave us a lift as far as the Tallow Road turning, on a wagon of green hides, behind a mule called Pitch that hated all 3 of us on sight. He gave us his opinion of the marches, which was that they were no place for anybody, and then he asked Ilna twice whether she was for sale, and twice I gave him no, and the second time my voice cracked, and he laughed at that for about a mile. Why bother saying it, Ilna asked me that night, if you could not have stopped him? I had nothing. I still have nothing, except that a man who says nothing gets very good at saying nothing, and I had been getting good at it for 4 years. Senat sits in a bend of the river Colt with the sill at its back, and the sill is 9 miles of standing dead forest that burned before anybody living was born and never came back. Nothing grows in it. Nothing hunts in it. The bark is black and the trunks are gray, and when the wind goes through it the whole thing whistles. The village was 31 turf roofs, a well with a cracked collar, a long house with no roof on the north end, and a stone in the middle of the green about the size of a hearth, which is exactly what it is, because Senate burns 1 fire for everybody in winter to save fuel. And women. Only women. 86 of them and several children, and not one man over the age of 9. Ilna had been born there. She had been sold out of it at 15 to pay a levy, and I am going to put that plainly one time and then never dress it up again. She walked back in after 10 years away, and an old woman with flour to the elbows came out of the bakehouse, looked at her, and sat straight down in the mud. That was Mavis. May. She has run those ovens for 40 years, and she is the only person in this story who was never once afraid of me, including on the days when she should have been. Your mother went in the second winter. May was still sitting in the mud. Your sister is at Draymore. 3 years now. She is alive, before you ask, and no, you cannot go and get her. May does not believe in working up to anything. They fed us barley water and a piece of hard cheese the size of my thumb, and while we ate they explained how Senate works, and it took about 4 minutes, because there is not much of it. 9 years ago the crown took a levy for the war in the east. Every village sent men. Senate sent 41, which was all of them, because the reeve who came through counted elf men at half a man each and doubled the tally to make his number. None came back. No word, no pay, no bodies, no letter. The land is theirs and the river is theirs. But the ford is at Ox Cross and the ford belongs to Draymore, and the only watermill in 20 miles belongs to Draymore, and Draymore grinds Senate grain at 1 sack in 3. Draymore has 900 people. Senate has 86. That is the entire argument, and both sides have always known it. The headman is Halder Vosk. His son is Rook. Twice a year Rook comes over and takes what he calls the ford fee, and one spring he took a girl called Wren, and last autumn one called Dove, and gave Dove back at harvest. Has nobody gone to the crown? Belle took that one. Belle is a widow with Gray coming in at the temples who teaches the children their letters with a stick in the ash, because there is no slate in Senate and never has been. 3 times. The third time the crown sent a man to look into it. He stayed 2 nights at Draymore, ate at Halder Vosk's table, and rode home, and we have not been back since. And then Cass came through the door at a dead run. They are at the granary. Cass is the one who can shoot. She was 19 then, with a hunting bow that had belonged to somebody's husband, and 12 arrows, and she had never once been allowed to use them. Because the last time a Senate woman put an arrow in a Draymore man the whole village went hungry for a season, and everyone remembers whose fault they decided that was. I went out the door before anybody could tell me not to, and I have never been able to decide whether that was the bravest or the most useless thing I have ever done. There were 14 of them in the yard behind the granary. They had the doors chalked open and they were carrying out the winter grain in sacks and stacking it on 2 carts, and they were doing it slowly, the way you do a thing you have done many times and expect to do many more times after this. Rook Vosk sat on the well wall eating an apple. He was younger than I expected. 26, thick through the shoulders, very good boots. He watched me come across the yard and he did not get up, which I understood a great deal better about a year later. Put the grain back. And who are you? A summoner out of Holloway. That is what I gave him, standing in a granary yard with nothing in my hands and nothing behind me. That was the last good moment I had for about 2 hours, because he laughed until he had to set the apple down on the well wall to do it properly, and then he told the man nearest him to go and see what a summoner out of Holloway summons. So I opened the gate. I opened it as well as I have ever opened anything. The ring came up clean, the air went cold, and the hole hung there in the middle of the granary yard the size of a door, and out of it came exactly what had come out of it at the college. Nothing. Cold air. Wet metal. And that flat iron honk, twice, very far away. One of them threw a turnip through it, and the turnip did not come back. Then they took me apart. Not badly, by the standards of the thing. Somebody hooked my legs and somebody knelt on my arm and Rook came off the wall and took his time about it, and what I remember is not the boots at all. What I remember is Tessa. Tessa is a small woman with a chipped front tooth who kept the goats, and she got hold of my collar while I was still upright, and she put it right into my ear, in a whisper. Please do not please stop them. Please do not. Because if I fought them it would be worse afterwards, and worse for her in particular, and I did not understand why for another 5 weeks. They finished with me and went back to loading, and Rook picked his apple back up, and one of his men had Poppy by the hair. Poppy is May's granddaughter's girl. She was 14. She had come out of the bakehouse because she heard shouting and she had a wooden paddle in her hand and she had actually swung it at him, which remains the bravest and stupidest single thing that happened in Senate that year. So I was on my hands and knees in the mud of the granary yard with blood coming out of my nose, in front of my whole village, if I can call it my village after 2 hours, and I would like to put it that I made a decision. I did not make a decision. I got angry. There is no ritual for angry. No chalk, no ring, no breath count. I put my hand flat in the mud and I pulled at the place where the gate lives with everything I had, the way you pull at a door you already know is locked, and the mud went cold under my palm, and the gate opened, and this time it was not empty. Snow. That was the first thing. A gray road with snow blowing sideways across it in the dark, and two hard white lights somewhere behind, and a wind that came through into a warm summer yard in the ash marches and made every single person in that yard flinch, and a man standing with his back to us. He turned round slowly, the way a man turns when the thing behind him has made a sound that is not possible. Tall, thin, dressed in green and gray and brown blotches, a pack on one shoulder, and in both hands the longest and ugliest metal stick I have ever seen in my life. He looked at the yard. He looked at the 14 men. He looked at me on my hands and knees in the mud. And then he stepped through, and the snow shut behind him, and the yard went very quiet. Rookvosk started laughing again about 4 seconds later, and those 4 seconds are the only time I ever saw him afraid of anything. The man in the blotched clothes looked round once more, and then he did the thing I did not expect at all. He crouched down beside me in the mud and spoke to me in an accent I had never heard, quiet, as if the rest of them were not there. You do that? Yes. Can you send me back? I do not know. He was silent for a second. All right. He stood up and looked at the 14 men and the 2 carts and the girl held by the hair, and did nothing whatsoever. Rook's men had come round us in a loose ring by then, close enough to touch, and one of them poked the metal stick with the butt of a spear to see what it was made of, and the man in the blotches let him do it. Do something. Anything. I do not work at 12 paces. Then he walked out of the ring, and nobody stopped him, and that is what I still find funny. 14 armed men parted for him because he walked like a man going somewhere he was allowed to go. He went out of the granary yard and up the sheep track on the west shoulder of the hill, and he never once looked back. Rook watched him the whole way and then put it out loud, so that everybody had to hear it. The summoner out of Holloway has summoned a coward. They finished loading. It took another quarter hour. They let Poppy go because she had stopped fighting and there was no sport left in it, and then Rook came over and put a boot on my shoulder, not hard, and gave me the fee. If you mean to stay in Senate, learn it. It is a third, and it is a third whether the mill runs or not. Then the top of his cart exploded. That is honestly what it looked like from where I was lying. A grain sack on the high cart jumped and burst and threw barley 6 feet in the air, and half a second later a sound came down off the west shoulder like the sky had been slapped, and it rolled out across the valley and came back off the sill twice. Every man in that yard went flat. 2 horses bolted with the second cart. Rookvosk got under the well wall with his hands over his head and had not yet decided whether to be frightened, because there was nothing there to be frightened of. No arrow. No rider. Nothing at all except a hole through a sack of barley and a noise. I looked up at the west shoulder. 400 yards away, maybe more, there was a shape lying in the heather that had not been there before, and it was not moving, and I understood with a cold drop in my stomach that it had been watching all of us for a quarter of an hour while none of us could see it. The second sack burst. Then the yoke pin on the near cart, which I had not known was a thing a person could aim at, and the cart went over sideways and the whole load went into the mud. Rookvosk ran, and his men ran with him, and they went through the ford at Ox Cross at a speed that cost them one man's boot, which had a hole through the heel, and every scrap of their dignity. And the yard was quiet, and there was barley everywhere, and 86 women were standing in their doorways looking at a hill. He came down about 10 minutes later. He walked into the middle of the green and set the long metal thing on the hearthstone very carefully, the way you set down something worth more than the house it is standing in. And then he sat on the stone beside it and put his head in his hands for a while, and nobody went near him, and May had the presence of mind to hand me a cloth for my nose. When he lifted his head he wanted the name of the country, and I gave it to him, and he had never heard of it. I have never heard of yours either. That is fair. My name is Marcus Wilder. Sura went close first, because Sura is frightened of absolutely everything and it makes her stupidly brave in a way I have never understood. She got about 6 feet away and stopped. What is that thing? A rifle. Then he saw that the word had done nothing at all, and he thought about it, and tried again. It is a thing that throws a small piece of metal very fast and very far. How far? Cass asked, from the back of the crowd. Wilder looked up at the west shoulder and back down again. Further than you can see from here. We did not eat that night, because the grain in the mud had to be swept and picked and washed, and we did that until moonrise, all of us, and Wilder swept with a broom May put in his hands and never once complained about it. Afterwards he asked me to sit down with him on the hearthstone. He took a cloth out of his pack and laid it flat on the stone and emptied his pockets and his pouches onto it, and this is where the whole rest of my life started. Brass. Small brass cylinders the length of my finger, each with a gray point on the end. He laid them out in rows of 10 in the moonlight and counted them aloud in his own language and then again in mine, and got the same number both times. 41. I had 45 this morning. I put one into a sack and one into a sack and one into a yoke pin and one into a man's boot heel, and now I have 41. How many are left where you keep them? He looked at me for a long moment, and I remember thinking that whatever came next was going to be the important part of the day. This world does not make these. It cannot. Not the brass, not the powder, and above all not the little copper cap in the base. Give every smith in this country 100 years and they will not make me one that works. Then he put his hand flat over the rows, covering all of them at once. When these are gone I am a man with a heavy stick. Somewhere behind us May dropped a pot, and Wilder did not jump, which I noticed and thought about later. So I sat on that stone with a broken nose and 41 pieces of brass in front of me and I understood the shape of the rest of my life. It was not a gift. It was a fuse. Somebody had handed me a fuse and lit it and walked off, and everything I did from that night forward was going to be measured against how fast it burned. Then I put him the only useful question of that whole day. What do you need? He thought about it a while, and what he wanted was not ammunition and not food and not a way home, although he wanted all three of those badly. A place to lie down where nobody walks up on me while I am asleep. So we gave him the north end of the longhouse, which had no roof, and Ilna and Cass and I put turf over the beams by lamplight because none of us could have slept anyway. We finished a little before dawn. It was the worst roof ever built by 3 people in the dark, and he lay down under it and was asleep in about 40 seconds. And that is when the stone lit up. I was still out on the green getting my boots off, and I felt it go warm underneath me, not hot, warm the way bread is warm, and I got up fast and turned round. There was a mark on the stone that had not been there an hour before. A ring, cut clean into the granite as though it had always been cut there, about the size of a dinner plate, and inside the ring the stone had gone the color of an old coin. And standing upright in the middle of it, on its base, as if somebody had set it there deliberately, was one small brass cylinder with a gray point on the end. It was warm. It smelled of wet metal. It smelled of the gate. So I stood in an empty village at 4 in the morning holding it and doing the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was that we had put a roof on a building, and a man had gone to sleep under it without being afraid, and the world had paid us for it. 42, I thought. I went and woke Ilna, which she has never let me forget. She came out with a blanket round her shoulders and looked at the stone and then at the brass in my hand, and gave me the first genuinely useful thing anybody managed in this entire story. Do it again, and find out what it wants. So we found out what it wants, and it took 14 days, and they were the most useful 14 days of my life. The first thing we tried was the obvious thing. We put a roof on the south end of the longhouse as well. 2 days of work, 6 women, turf and rafters, and Belle moved in with the 4 smallest children because their own place leaked. Nothing. The stone stayed cold for 3 nights running, and by the 4th I was ready to take the roof back off and try the whole thing somewhere else entirely. Then on the 4th night Belle came out and told me, in a voice she was plainly embarrassed about, that little Finn had woken twice and cried and gone back down, and that it was the first night in a year she herself had not lain awake listening for horses. The stone was warm before she finished the sentence. That was rule 1 and it cost us 4 days. The hearth does not pay for a roof. It pays for what happens underneath one. It pays when a person who was afraid stops being afraid, and it pays exactly once, and it never pays for that same person twice. Rule 2 we learned by being greedy. We re-roofed 9 houses in a fortnight and the stone paid 9 times and then stopped dead, and we re-roofed a 10th and got nothing at all, because the woman in the 10th had been sleeping perfectly well the whole time and had only wanted a dry ceiling. Rule 3 was the one that made Wilder laugh for the first time. The stone does not give you what you ask for. It gives you something out of the same drawer. We got brass that first night, and brass again the night Belle's children slept, and neither one was the right shape, and neither one ever went into the rifle. Then over 3 weeks we got, in this order, a coil of thin bright wire, a flat tin of small round biscuits, and a bar of soap that smelled of a flower nobody in this country has ever seen. Then a pair of boots in a size that fit nobody, a glass jar of yellow fruit swimming in syrup, and a thing made of pink stone in the shape of a bird standing on one leg. Wilder held the pink bird up to the light for a long time. Where I come from, people put these in front of their houses on purpose. I have no explanation and I do not wish to discuss it any further. That bird is on our flag now. The jar of yellow fruit we opened at the hearth with 50 people watching, and Wilder cut the fruit up with his knife and everybody got a piece the size of a fingernail. And Poppy cried, and May let out a word I will not repeat, and Sura kept the syrup and used it for 2 years to make children swallow medicine. But the wire mattered more than any of it, because Wilder took one look at the coil. Snares. And by the end of that week we had 15 rabbits and a hare, and Senate ate meat for the first time since spring. That is the honest reckoning of our first month. For shots fired, 1 man in a bad temper across the river, and 15 rabbits. I should say what Wilder was actually like then, because everybody in the marches has an opinion about him now and most of those opinions are wrong. How old was he? 38. He had a wife called Dana and a daughter called June who was 7, and a dog he was considerably more sentimental about than either of them, which he admitted freely and often. He had soldiered 16 years in a country he called the sandbox and then 4 more doing something he never explained properly. And at the moment I pulled him through he had been standing on a road in the snow at 2 in the morning changing a wheel, which is a thing I only understood about a year later. He was not brave the way songs are brave. He was careful the way a joiner is careful. He walked ground before he slept on it. He ate before he was hungry. And every single day for the first month he asked whether I had made any progress on sending him home, and every single day I gave him no, and every single day he took it and went back to work. And he was patient with the village in a way I have never managed, because the village was terrified of him. Not of the rifle. Of him. A strange man arriving in a place that had learned exactly one lesson about strange men. Cass slept across the door of the children's house for the first 9 nights with her bowstring and her boots on. He fixed that himself, and it took him a week, and I did not understand what he was doing until it was already done. He carried water. That was all. Every morning he took the 2 big yokes down to the colt and filled them and carried them up, which is 40 minutes of miserable work that 2 women had done every day for 9 years. And nobody had to put into it and nobody thanked him and without going anywhere near anybody's door. By the 2nd week May was leaving bread out for him. By the 3rd week Sura was following him about asking what the little dark tube on the top of the rifle was for. By the 4th week he had 6 of them lying on their bellies in the heather learning to lie still, which is the only part of his trade that can be taught to anybody at all. He gave the little dark tube to Sura for one afternoon. She came back down white as milk and could not speak for an hour, because she had put it on the sill and seen a dead tree 9 miles off close enough to count its branches, and it had rearranged her entire understanding of the world. She runs the herd house now. I have always thought it started that afternoon. Meanwhile Draymore was doing arithmetic of its own, and I have never once pretended that Halder Vosk was a stupid man. He is about 60, heavy, cheerful, red in the face, with a habit of putting his hand on your shoulder while he explains what is going to happen to you. He had run Draymore for 22 years and in all that time had never had to explain himself to anybody. His son had come home without 2 carts, with a hole through his hat, telling a story about thunder on a clear day. So Vosk did the sensible thing and sent somebody to look. The somebody was Piper Doone, the miller's boy, 16 and fast, and he came over the shoulder above Senate on a gray afternoon and lay in the bracken 4 hours counting our roofs. Wilder had him spotted in about 90 seconds and did not touch him. Why not? We were lying in the heather 30 feet away and I could see the boys' boots. A scout who goes home tells them what he saw. A scout who does not go home tells them something far more frightening. Right now I want them thinking about barley sacks and not about a hole in the world. So we let him count, and Wilder made very sure that what he counted was interesting. He walked 6 of us in a line up onto the shoulder, along the ridge, down into the dead trees, then back round out of sight and up again, twice over, so that a boy in the bracken with no glass counted 18 figures on the skyline instead of 6. Piper Doone went home and told Halder Vosk that Senate had men in it now. That was the first lie I ever told in the marches, and I never spoke. Vosk's reply came 9 days later, and it was a great deal cleverer than a raid. He simply shut the mill. Not to everybody. Only to us. The miller guard Doone came out onto his step and told our carrier that Senate grain would not be ground at Draymore this year on account of the disturbance, and that Senate was very welcome to take its grain to the next mill, which is at Merriford, which is 2 days down the Tallow Road, and the Tallow Road begins at Ox Cross, and Ox Cross is Draymore's ford. He was extremely pleasant about it. He gave our carrier a bun. That evening we sat in the longhouse with the whole village inside it, and I watched every face go through the same 3 stages, and the 3rd stage was the one I could not stand, which was the shrug. We will grind by hand. Belle was not being brave, she was being accurate. 86 women with cornstones can grind enough for 86 women. It takes 4 hours a day, it destroys your wrists by 40, and it means you can never grow one single grain more than you eat. That is what Draymore actually took from us that morning. Not the flour. The surplus. You cannot trade what you cannot mill, and nobody ever got rich on what they ate, and Halder Vosk had understood that for 22 years while we had failed to understand it for 9. We will build our own mill. With what? And that is the question that walked me out into the sill the next morning, because I did not have an answer, and I have never been able to sit still in a room where I am the stupidest person present. Every village in the marches knows the sill is cursed, and Senate believed it too, which is remarkable, because Senate has its back against it. It burned about 90 years ago and nobody knows why. The trees did not fall. They died standing, and the soil under them went sour, and now it is gray trunks as far as you can see, with black bark that flakes off in your hand, and no birds at all. I walked in about a mile and put my hand on a trunk and shoved, and it did not move, and I hit it with the back of my knife and it rang. Dead standing timber. Seasoned in place for 90 years. No sap left in it and no rot in it either, because the ground is far too sour to hold the fungus that rots things. I sat down in the ash and laughed until Ilna came in to find out what was wrong with me. There is a word for 9 miles of dead seasoned hardwood standing upright and waiting, and the word is charcoal. And charcoal is what every smith in the marches burns, and every smith in the marches buys it from the tallow guild at Marrowford at whatever price the tallow guild announces that year. We had been sitting on the largest fuel pile in the province for 9 years and calling it a curse because it whistled at night. I put it to the village that evening and it did not go the way I had imagined. Who is going to cut it? Who is going to cart it? Who is going to carry it over Ox Cross, since Ox Cross is Draymore's ford and we have just been shut out of it? And Tessa, quietly, from the back. What happens to Senate on the day Draymore finds out Senate has money? I did not have a good answer to any of it. I had one answer. A village with nothing is a village that anybody can rob, and a village with something is a village that has to be argued with, and I would rather be argued with. Ilna stood up. I will cut. Then Cass, then May, then Poppy, who was still 14 and still had the paddle. Then Belle put in her children to stack, and after that it went round the room the way those things do. And by the end of it I had 86 people and no axes. We owned 4 axes in Senate. 4. 2 of them were splitting axes with the temper burnt out of them. So the first thing the greatest charcoal operation in the Ash Marches ever did was walk to Marrowford with its entire cash reserve, which was 7 silver and a copper button, and come home with 9 felling axes, 3 wedges, a rasp, and a debt. I need to explain the debt, because the debt is a person, and the person matters for the next 2 years. Marrowford is a market town of about 4,000 where the Tallow Road crosses the Colt, and it belongs, in every way that counts, to the Baroness Idymar. She is a widow of about 45 with a bad hip and a very good memory, and her barony consists of the town, the bridge tolls, 6 villages, and a great deal of debt inherited from a husband who liked horses more than he liked arithmetic. I went to her because you cannot buy 9 axes on credit from an ironmonger in a town like that without the ironmonger going and asking somebody first. She saw me in a room with 3 windows and a fire that was not lit, and she let me stand there a while, and then she put it to me. What is an empty gate doing in my market? She had already heard 9 days for a shut mill and 12 for a name and a story, which tells you exactly what her post is like. I told her about the sill. I did not tell her about Wilder. We have timber and no tools, and I want 9 axes against the first burn. And my security is what? The sill. The sill is worthless. That is why the security is so large. She laughed at that, which I had not expected, and she gave me the axes against a quarter of the first 4 burns. Then she gave me one other thing, and she made a point of putting it into my hand herself. A folded paper with a seal on it. A market right, saying that Senate might sell in Marrowford Market on the 2nd and 4th days without paying stallage, for 3 years. Why? Because the Tallow Guild has set the price of charcoal in my own town for 16 years, and I have paid it every one of those years, and I would very much like to watch somebody's face when it moves. Then came the other thing, the thing I should have listened to a great deal harder. Understand me, empty gate. I am not your friend. I am a woman with a bridge and a debt. On the day it is worth more to me to sell you than to buy from you, I will sell you, and I will do it politely. I understand. I did not understand in the slightest. I was 22 and somebody had just handed me 9 axes. We burned our first pit that autumn and we made a thorough mess of it. A charcoal pit is a stack of split wood built up into a dome, covered over in turf and ash, lit through a hole in the top, and then you spend 8 days and 8 nights keeping it barely alive, because if it gets air it burns away to nothing, and if it chokes it stays wood. You watch the smoke. When the smoke turns from white to thin blue, you close the vent on that side and open another one. Had anybody in Senate ever burned a pit? Not one of us. I had read a single paragraph about it in a book I stole from the college library, and the paragraph was about the ENN coast, where they use pine. The first pit went up like a beacon on the third night and we lost the whole thing, and Cass took a burn on her forearm that she still has. The second pit choked, and we opened it after 9 days and got 2 cartloads of half-burned wood that nobody would buy at any price. The third pit worked. 15 cartloads of good hard black charcoal that rang when you knocked 2 lumps together, and we stood round it in the grey dawn like people looking at a newborn, and May picked up a lump and turned it over in her floury hands. Ugliest money I ever saw. And the stone on the green was warm that morning, and lying in the ring was a thing none of us could name, a flat black rectangle with a glass face. And Wilder picked it up and pressed it, and it made a small light, and a shape came up on the glass, and there was a number on it, and the number went down every day for a good many days, and then it went dark forever. He held it a long time. Then he put it in his pack and did not talk about it, then or ever. The stone pays out of whatever a home is made of. It does not know whose. That night it reached in and got his exactly right, and I wished very hard that it had given him a bar of soap instead. Now the charcoal had to reach Marrowford, and Marrowford is 2 days down the Tallow Road, and the Tallow Road begins at Ox Cross. We loaded 4 carts. 2 oxen borrowed from a widow at Cinderholm and 2 carts pulled by women on ropes, and we came down to the ford at first light with 15 cartloads of the best charcoal in the province and the market right of the Baroness Ivymar folded in my coat. And Rook Vosk was standing in the middle of the ford with 30 men. Not 14. 30. 2 of them with crossbows, and every one of them standing in the water, which meant they had been there a good while, which meant somebody had told them exactly which morning we were coming. I looked back up the bank at Senate and thought about how many people had known. Ford fee has gone up on account of the disturbance. New fee is all of it. Wilder was 500 yards behind me in the heather, and I knew precisely where, and all I had to do was lift my hand. I did not lift my hand. I want to be very clear about why, because for about a year afterwards half the village thought it was cowardice and the other half thought it was cleverness, and it was neither of those things. It was arithmetic. 41 pieces of brass. 30 men standing in a river. I gave him the charcoal. We walked the empty carts back up the hill in front of the entire village, and it was the longest 400 yards of my life. Cass would not look at me. Poppy, out loud, in a carrying voice. Why did the loud man not make the noise? That night I sat on the hearthstone in the dark and understood my actual problem for the first time. I did not have a weapon. I had 41 moments, 41 times in the whole rest of my life when I could reach out and take one thing off the board, and after that I was a man in a burnt village with a book full of the word no. Everything else was going to have to be built. Ilne came and sat beside me about midnight and stayed quiet for a while. My father used to say the only thing worse than losing a fight is winning one you cannot afford. Your father sounds like a careful man. My father went east with the levy, and careful did not help him even slightly. So what do we build? A ford. The Colt is a bad little river. It runs fast and cold out of the high ground, and it is chest deep at Senate with a bottom of round stones that turn under your foot. And there is exactly one place in 6 miles where a cart can cross, and Draymore built a village on top of it 400 years ago and has been charging for it ever since. Wilder and I walked the bank for 3 days looking for a second place. 2 miles upstream of Senate there is a shelf of flat rock under the water at a bend they call Bell Rock, and the water there is thigh deep and the bottom is solid, and the only problem with it is the far bank, which is a clay wall 12 feet high. So how do we get a loaded cart up 12 feet of wet clay? We do not. We cut the bank down to the water and we lay the spoil on the near side as a ramp, and we face both ramps with stones so it does not turn to soup in the rain. How many people can you put on it? Everybody. That is the whole point of us. How long does a ford take, if you have no money and no engineers and 86 pairs of hands? 26 days. 86 women, 11 children, 2 borrowed oxen, 4 axes, 9 new axes, and every basket in the village. We cut the clay down with mattocks and carried it across in baskets on our heads and packed it and faced it with river stone laid on edge, and they fed us out of the ovens twice a day. And on the 11th day Belle brought the children down to lay the small stones because small hands are better at packing a face than big ones. And the whole time, every single day, I was waiting for Draymore. Did Draymore come? They came on the 9th day and stood on the far bank and watched. On the 14th day they came again and one of them threw a stone that hit Poppy on the shoulder. On the 20th day Rukvas came down and stood in the shallows and shouted across the water that anything built in the river belonged to the river, and the river belonged to Draymore, and if we finished it he would come and unbuild it. Cass had an arrow on the string before I got to her. Do not. He is 60 yards away and standing in a river and I will hit him in the eye. And then what? And then he is dead. And then 900 people come over that bank in a week and there are 86 of us. Put it down. She put it down, and she did not speak to me for 2 days, and she was righter than I was, which is a thing I have had a long time to think about. That was also the week we found out how the hearth had leashed us, and I want to tell this properly because it is the single most important fact in this entire story and we found it out by accident, in the rain, arguing about a hat. Wilder had decided to go to Marrowford. Not for anything dramatic. He wanted to see a town, look at what the Smiths could actually do, put his hands on the local iron and find out how bad it was. He set off down the Tallow Road at dawn with a pack and one of May's hats and by noon he was back, walking, with an expression I had not seen on him before. I cannot leave. He took me down the road and showed me. For miles out, at the old Drover Stone past Cinderholm turning, he walked forward and stopped. Not stopped the way a man stops. Stopped the way a door stops. He put his shoulder into it and his boots slid backwards in the mud and nothing at all happened. I put my own hand out past him and it went through empty air like empty air. So we spent 2 days walking a circle round Senate, marking where the wall was, and when we had the whole line drawn on the ash floor of the longhouse I sat looking at it for about an hour before I understood what I was looking at. It was not a circle round the hearth. It was a shape. A blotchy, lopsided shape with a long finger going west up the sheep track, and another going 2 miles north to Bell Rock, and it matched the roofs. Every roof we had put on. Every place a frightened person had lain down and stopped being frightened. Wilder cannot go further from the hearthstone than the furthest bed in which somebody sleeps safe. Do you understand what that means? I put it about 6 times that night to different people and May finally told me to sit down and eat something. It means his range is our building. It means that if I want him to be able to reach that ford, somebody has to sleep at that ford. It means the man is a weapon that is exactly as long as the village is wide. Ilna got it before anybody. She was already looking at the ash floor with her head on one side. So if we put a house at Bell Rock, and somebody lives in it and sleeps well in it, then he can stand on the ridge above the crossing. Yes. And if we put houses all the way down the Tallow Road? Then he can stand over the Tallow Road. She sat back and made a small sound. Then we are not building a village. We are building a range. Bell Rock House went up in 4 days and it is the ugliest building in the Marches, 1 room, turf roof, a chimney that draws wrong. And Bell volunteered to sleep in it with 2 of the older girls because Bell understood exactly what we were doing and had decided it was worth a cold room. The stone paid US 3 times that week. A wooden handle with a metal head that turns screws. A folded paper packet with a picture of a smiling woman on it that turned out to be seeds for a vegetable nobody here had ever grown, which we now grow some fields of, and a spool of gray sticky ribbon that Wilder held up to the lamp and said, in a slightly unsteady voice, that with enough of this you can hold a world together. We finished the ford on the 26th day and we crossed it with 4 empty carts, and then we turned round and crossed back, because that was the whole ceremony we had time for. Rukvas came the next night with 15 men and torches to unbuild it. I have gone over what happened next more times than is good for me. We had a watch. Bell had the Bell Rock House and the 2 girls, and Cass had the ridge with her bow, and Wilder was asleep in the longhouse 2 miles south because he had been awake for 31 hours and I had ordered him to bed, and that order was mine, and I have never once pretended otherwise. They fired the timber stack on the ramp first, which was the sensible thing, and Bell came out of the house shouting and one of them knocked her down with the flat of a shovel. Then they went for the facing stones with bars. Poppy was in that house. Nobody had told me Poppy was in that house. She had gone up with Bell to help with the small stones and she had stayed, because she was 14 and it was an adventure, and Rukvas came round the corner of the house and got her by the arm. He was not going to kill her. I want to be accurate about the man, because accuracy is the only revenge I ever managed on him. He was going to take her across the river, the way he had taken Ren 3 years before and Dove the autumn before that. And he was going to do it in front of a woman lying in the mud with a shovel mark on her, so that the story would come back to Senate properly told. Cass shot him from 10 feet. Not from the ridge. She came down off the ridge and through the burning timber and out from behind the corner of the house, and she put an arrow through him from close enough to touch. And then she stood there with the bow still up while he went down on his knees in the wet clay we had all carried in baskets on our heads. His men left him. They went into the river and they went across it and they left him lying on our ford, and he took about a quarter of an hour to die, and Belle sat with him because Belle is that sort of person. And he wanted water twice and she gave it to him twice. Cass was sick in the reeds afterwards, and then she came and stood in front of me with her chin up and put it to me. Should I run? Run where? To Marrowford. To anywhere. They will want somebody hanged for this. They will want somebody hanged for this, and it is not going to be you, and I do not know yet how I am going to manage that, but you are not leaving, and you are not sleeping alone tonight, and give me the bow before you drop it. She would not give me the bow. She has still got it. It is on the wall of the school now with the string off. Then May came up from the village with 4 women and blankets and a lamp, and she looked at Rookvosk lying on the ramp and she gave us the thing that I think actually saved us, and she gave it loudly and in front of everybody. Bring him over. He is not lying on my ford all night like a dog. Wash him and put him in the cart and take him home to his father in daylight where everyone can see he was brought and not dumped, which is what we did. We washed Rookvosk and laid him in a cart with a cloth over him, and May and Belle walked him to Ox Cross in the middle of the morning, 2 old women and a horse, and stood there in the water until Draymore came out and took him. Halder Vosk did not say anything at all. He looked at his son and then he looked at May for a long time. He was armed. He had 15 men with torches and he had a 14-year-old girl by the arm. That is what happened, and I will say it to anybody, and I am 71 years old and I am not running anywhere, so send for whoever you like. Then she and Belle walked home, and that is the whole of it, and I did not fire a shot and I did not lift a hand, and I have never in my life been prouder of anybody. Draymore buried Rook and then it went quiet for 19 days, and quiet is worse. What came out of the quiet was not soldiers. It was a piece of paper and a man called Mabon Craik. Craik is the crown reeve for the marches, and he is a thin, tired, decent enough man with too much district and not enough horses, and he arrived on a mule with a writ, and the writ said that 1 Cassine of Senate was to answer at Marrowford for the death of Rookvosk, and that the village of Senate was fined 90 silver for a fray, and that the crossing constructed at Bell Rock was declared an unlicensed work and was to be broken up within 1 month. I read it twice. The fine we could not pay. The crossing was the only thing we owned, and the third item made my hands go cold, because it had nothing to do with either of those and everything to do with what Halder Vosk had actually done in those 19 quiet days. Craik would not look at me while I read it. He asked for water and drank it and then let out, quietly, that he had been reeve for 30 years and that in that time Draymore had never once been fined for anything, and that I should draw whatever conclusion I liked from that, and that he was going to go and sit by the river for an hour, and if the paper were to blow away it would be a very great nuisance for him. I did not let it blow away. I have it still. But I liked him from that hour, and it turned out to matter enormously later. What do you do with a fine you cannot pay? You pay it. We paid the fine. That is the flat, unheroic middle of it. We sold the second charcoal burn and the fourth, and we paid 90 silver to the crown for the crime of not letting a man carry off a 14-year-old girl, and we kept the crossing by a trick that was not even mine. Belle found it. Belle had been to Marrowford twice in her life and had read every scrap of paper she had ever been allowed near, and she pointed out that the writ declared an unlicensed work and ordered it broken up, and that the Baroness Ivy Marr held the licensing of works on the colt between the 2 bridges, and had done since her husband bought the right in a bad year. So I walked to Marrowford again and stood in the room with 3 windows. You want me to license a ford that competes with the ford of a village that is currently very angry with you, and pays me nothing. It pays you the tolls. There are no tolls on it. There will be. She looked at me for a while. Then she put me a question I did not expect at all, leaning forward with her hands on the table. How much charcoal is in that dead forest? I did the sum out loud for her. 9 miles by 4. Standing seasoned hardwood at about 30 cords the acre if we cut clean and leave the small stuff. I had done that arithmetic on the ash floor of the longhouse 8 times, and I could not make it come out smaller than 60 years of burning. 60 years. 60, if we never plant a tree, and I intend to plant trees. She licensed the ford for a 40th of everything that crossed it, which was robbery, and she made me sign it at her table with her own pen, and then she poured 2 cups of wine and sat back and gave me the sentence that started the next 3 years of my life. The Tallow Guild sells charcoal in this town at 11 copper the sack. They have sold it at 11 copper the sack since before my husband died. Come back to me when you can put it on my market at 7, and I will find out for you exactly how many friends I have. I went home and told the village we were licensed and fined and that Cass had to answer at Marrowford in the spring, and that we now had a fort of our own that nobody could legally break, and that we were going to burn charcoal until our eyes bled. And then I asked Ilna to walk out to the granary with me, because I had been thinking for 19 days about how Draymore had known which morning our carts were coming. Somebody told them. She did not argue. She had got there before me, I think, and had not wanted to say it. Who knew the day? Everybody knew the day. That is the trouble. But 6 people knew the hour, and 3 of them were carrying the ropes. We did not find her that autumn. I want to say that plainly because I have heard the story told in Marrowford as if I worked it out in a night with a candle, and I did not. I suspected the wrong woman for 6 weeks. I suspected Dove, who had been in Draymore for a season and come back changed, and I watched her, and I was completely wrong, and she knew I was watching her, and she has never entirely forgiven me and she is right not to. What actually happened was that the granary burned. It was the 7th night after the frost. The new granary, the one we had built on stone footings against the north wall of the long house with the last of the Ford timber, with 4 months of barley and the seed corn for the spring in it. It went up at about 2 in the morning and there was nothing anybody could do. Green thatch, dry grain, no water higher than the well. We formed a line to the well and we passed buckets for 2 hours and all we did was save the long house. Nian died in it. Nian kept the bees. She was 50-something and she talked to almost nobody and she had 14 hives along the south hedge and she made the only sweet thing in the village. And she went into the granary because the hives were stacked against the granary wall for the winter, wrapped in straw, and she went to pull them clear, and the wall came out. We got her out. Sura worked on her for a day and a half. She died on the 2nd morning and Sura sat outside the herd house, which was not a herd house yet, it was a shed, and she would not let anybody touch her for an hour. 14 hives. 9 of them survived, because she got them out first. We still have those bees. Every jar of honey out of Senate for the last 2 years came out of 9 hives that a woman nobody talked to carried out of a burning building. And the hearthstone was cold that week. Cold every single night. Because a village that has lost its seed corn and its granary and its beekeeper is not a place where anybody sleeps unafraid, and the hearth is not kind, and it does not care, and it is not on anybody's side. I sat on it in the dark and put my hand on the ring and got nothing, and I remember thinking, quite clearly, that I had brought a fuse into a village of 86 women and burned 4 months of their food. Wilder found me there some time before dawn. He sat down on the cold stone next to me and did not say anything comforting, because he never once did, and I have always been grateful for it. Was it set? He had already been round the whole building twice with a lamp. 3 seats of fire. North corner, east door, and the middle of the south wall. Fires do not do that. People do that. And then he asked the question that I should have asked myself on the day the carts came home empty, and he asked it flat, without any weight on it at all, which is the only way anybody has ever asked me anything useful. Who in this village has something across that river? Tessa has a daughter in Draymore. Her name is Pip. She is 9. I had known that for 4 months. It had gone past me in front of witnesses at least twice. It had gone past me the way things go past you when you are 22 and busy being clever about charcoal. She was in the goat pen at first light and she knew before I spoke. She put down the pail and stood with her hands at her sides and waited, and when I asked her she did not deny one single thing, and I have thought since that she had been waiting 4 months to be asked. Holder Vosk had taken Pip the spring before I came, for a debt of 6 silver that Tessa's husband owed a Draymore man before he went east. Pip works in the Vosk kitchen. Tessa is allowed to see her at the ford twice a year, in the water, for as long as it takes to say a few things. They told me she would come home when Senet stopped being trouble. That is the exact wording. Not when the debt is paid. When Senet stops being trouble. And then you came, and you were nothing but trouble, and every week you were more trouble than the week before. Did you fire the granary? No. I would not. I told them where the carts were going and what morning, and I told them the Ford watch changed at midnight, and I told them the granary was full, and I know what that adds up to and you do not have to say it slowly for me. Behind me half the village had come out to stand in the wet grass, because there is no such thing as a private conversation in a place with 31 roofs. Cass had her bow. May had her arms folded. Nobody spoke at all, and the silence went on long enough that I understood they were waiting for me, and that whatever I did in the next minute was going to be the law in Senate for a long time. I put her one more question, and I put it because I genuinely did not know. If I get her back, are you mine? She looked up at that. What does that mean? It means I am going to be doing this for years, and I am going to be doing it badly, and I need to know who is standing where. If I get your girl out of that house, do you stand here? I stand here. Then go and milk your goats. May caught my arm on the way back to the green. Have you gone soft in the head? 12 families lost their seed corn last night. They are going to want somebody in the river for it. Then tell them the truth. Tell them Halder Vosk has been holding a child hostage in his kitchen for 2 years and using her to buy a woman, and that he did it because we let him, and that when we get her back he has nothing left to buy anybody with. And May, tell it to them in that order. She looked at me for a second longer than was comfortable. You are going to be very good at this, and I have never been able to decide, from that day to this, whether it was a compliment. How do you get a child out of another man's kitchen? Not with a rifle. Getting Pip out of Draymore took several weeks and it was not done with a rifle, and this is the stretch of my life that nobody in Marrowford ever wants out of me, because it is entirely about iron. Draymore had a smith. Every village has a smith. Draymore's was Corvin Ash, 34, enormous, deaf in one ear from the hammer, with a younger brother called Tam who did the charcoal buying. And here was the thing that nobody in Draymore had thought about yet. Corvin Ash bought his charcoal from the tallow guild at Marrowford at 11 copper the sack, carted up the tallow road at his own cost, and he burned about 200 sacks a year. And he had been doing it for 15 years, and now there was 9 miles of the stuff standing on the far bank of his own river being cut by people he was supposed to be at war with. Tamash came to Bell Rock in the dark in the second week of the frost with a hood up. What do you sell at? 7. Delivered to your door on our cart. And I will make it 6 if you take 400 sacks and pay in iron instead of coin. He did not haggle. He stood there in the cold doing sums on his fingers, and then he asked, more or less to himself, what a man was supposed to do with the money he did not spend. And I put it to him that he could start by buying his brother a second anvil, and he laughed, and that was the first laugh anybody from Draymore gave anybody from Senate in 9 years. We ran charcoal across the Bell Rock Ford by night for 6 weeks and took payment in bar iron and horseshoe stock and nails are money. And then Halder Vosk found out, and he hanged Tamash. Not for that. Officially it was for theft from the mill store, and there was even a sack in the man's shed, and the whole of Draymore knew what the sack was and where it had come from. And it did not matter in the least, because Vosk had lost a son on our ford and needed to hang somebody and could not reach us. Corvin Ash came across the river the next night with his tools and a barrow, his forge bellows on his back, his wife Greta, and his brother's dog. He stood in the middle of our green in the rain at 3 in the morning with the barrow handles still in his fists and gave us one sentence. Where do you want the forge? We put it on the east side of the green, upwind of the bakehouse, and it has never moved. Corvin Ash is in this story from here to the end, so here is the man. He talks about twice a day. He thinks Wilder is some kind of god and has never entirely stopped thinking it, and for the first 2 months he left food outside the longhouse door, which Wilder ate, because Wilder is not a fool. He can look at a piece of iron and tell you what it will forgive. And he never mentioned his brother again, not once, in front of anybody, for 5 years. Greta Ash is a different matter entirely. Greta had run the Draymore Forge accounts for a few years and could not be lied to by anybody, and within a month she had the charcoal sales in her hands, and within a season she was the reason we were not robbed blind by every carter on the tallow road. And Pip came home in the spring, and it was not rescue and it was not a fight, and there was nobody on a hill with a rifle anywhere in it at all. Corvin Ash walked back into Draymore in daylight with 2 men from Cinderholm and stood in Halder Vosk's yard and offered to buy the child's dead at 4 times its face, in iron, in front of the whole village, and asked the question loudly enough for everybody at the well to hear it. Are you keeping her for the debt, or are you keeping her for something else? Vosk could not answer that in his own yard. He took the iron. Tessa met them at the ford. I have seen a great many things since, some of them in this same river, and that is still the one. Now, the niter beds. I have been putting this off because everybody laughs, and everybody is right to laugh, but the niter beds are the reason Senate is still standing, so here they are. Wilder had told me on the 3rd night that we could not make his ammunition, and I had believed him, and I had gone on believing him for months. What I never put to him, because I did not know enough to put it, was whether we could make something else. It came out sideways in the spring, in the forge, while Corvin was flattening a bar and Wilder was watching him do it. Wilder let out, mostly to himself, that with a barrel like that and black powder you could make a wall gun that would frighten anybody in this century. What is black powder? He stopped and turned round and looked at me for a long moment, and I remember the exact shape of his face. because it was the face of a man realizing he has been sitting in a room for 6 months with a locked door he never tried. Charcoal, sulfur, and saltpetre. We had charcoal. We had, as it turned out, more charcoal than anybody in the province. Sulfur was a problem for later. And saltpetre was a word neither Corvin nor I had ever heard in our lives. Wilder explained it, badly, twice, and then he gave us the thing that turned the whole village against him for about a fortnight. You make it. In a pit. Out of dung and straw and wood ash and urine, layered, kept damp, turned every few weeks, and left alone for a year and a half. May leaned on the door frame. That last part. Again. A year and a half. And what is in it at the end? White crystals. And I want to be clear with all of you, because you are going to hate me for the next 18 months. It is going to smell. Not a little. It is going to smell like the worst thing that has ever happened to any of you, and it will be sitting 100 yards upwind of the bakehouse, and there is no version of this where it does not put it downwind. There is no downwind. Not with the sill behind us. The wind comes off the burn and goes over the green and out to the river, and it has done that every day of my life. So we put it up the sheep track on the west shoulder, 300 yards out and above the village, and it did not help even slightly, and for 18 months Sennet smelled the way it smelled. And there is a woman in Marrowford who to this day will not buy our honey because of a single visit she paid us in the second summer. We dug 4 beds 12 paces by 4 and lined them with clay. Every goat in Sennet contributed. Every household emptied its pot into a barrel by the door, and Poppy carried the barrels up the hill on a sledge, and she was 15 by then, and she made everybody call her the powder mistress, and nobody argued, and it stuck, and it is on her house sign now. Wilder turned those beds himself with a fork twice a month for a year and a half without once complaining. And when I asked him why he would not let anybody else do it, he put it that if he was going to be here he was going to be useful, and that a man who has nothing to do all day gets ideas about walking into rivers. That was the only time he ever let out anything of the kind, and he let it out to a fork, not to me, and I did not pursue it. The hearth paid us that spring in a way it never did again, because that spring everything was new. New forge, new ford, new granary on stone with a slate roof, new houses for the Ash family and for Tessa and Pip. 14 draws in 7 weeks. We got a coil of stiff wire with a saw edge on it. A folding tool with 7 blades that Corvin nearly wept over. A tin box of small steel needles, which Belle took, and which are still the only steel needles in the ash marches. A flat white brick of soap. 2 more brass cylinders, both the wrong shape, which do not fit the rifle and sit on Sura's shelf to this day. And a book. That is the one that mattered, and none of us knew it for a month, because it was in his language and not in ours. It was thin, with a soft cover, and on the front was a drawing of a smiling man holding up a fish. Wilder went through it at the fire for 2 nights with his mouth open, and then he came and found me and put it in my hands. It is a book about how to live in the woods for children. It has snares in it. It has how to find water and how to build a fire in the rain and how to smoke fish and how to make soap and how to purify water with sand and charcoal, and there are pictures for all of it, and I have been carrying half of this in my head for 20 years and getting it wrong. We could not read the words. It did not matter. Belle copied the pictures onto boards with charcoal and hung them in the long house, and the whole village learned to smoke river eel that summer off a drawing of a smiling man holding up a fish. And smoked eel was our second trade good, and the first one Marrowford actually got excited about. That summer we crossed 600 sacks of charcoal at Bell Rock and sold them at 7 copper, and the tallow guild dropped to 9, and I did not understand what that meant at all, and Ivy Marr sent me a single line on a folded paper. Now they know your name. Take care with the road. The man who came up the road was not from the tallow guild. He came in the second week of the harvest, alone, in a good coat, on a mule with a white face, and he stopped at the green and got down and took his hat off to the women in the doorways before he spoke one word to anybody. Ashen Pal. He has a soft voice and very clean hands, and he is about 50, and he is the politest man I have ever met in my life. Might he trouble somebody for water for the mule, whose name was Duchess? He wanted to know about the harvest. He complimented the bakehouse. He noticed the pink stone bird on the pole and let out, with what I am fairly sure was genuine delight, that he had never seen anything like it. Then he sat down on the hearthstone, which nobody had invited him to do, and pulled out a folded paper. Am I speaking to the person who speaks for Sennet? The paper had a seal on it the size of my palm, and it was a crown license for the recovery and placement of debt-bound persons in the northern marches, and it was a good many years old, and it had been renewed 4 times. And there is nothing wrong with it. It is a real thing that a real crown gives to real men. Somebody has to collect real debts. I read it standing up. He waited with his hands folded. You will want to know what I want. I want nothing today. I have bought a bundle of old paper out of the East, from the War Office at SAR, and I am going through it slowly, and a great deal of it is nothing at all. But some of it is levy paper. Levy paper. When the Crown takes men, the Crown advances the village against their pay. Bounty money, kit money, the Reeves fee. It is a loan. It is repaid out of the man's wages over his service. And if the man does not survive to earn the wages, the loan stands against the household. I did not say anything. I could feel Ilna behind my shoulder go completely still. Senet sent 41 men, and Ashenpel kept that same soft, polite voice. None of them came back. That is 41 advances, unrepaid, at 15 silver each, running 9 years at the crown rate. He did not name the total. He did not have to, and I understood right then that he was very good at his work, because a number you work out yourself is a number you believe. And a household without a man at the head of it, he went on, that cannot answer a crown debt, is a household whose members may be placed. That is the license. That is what it is for. I do not enjoy it. I have never once enjoyed it, but I would be lying to you if I pretended I was not going to do it. Then he stood up and brushed the hearth dust off his coat and put his hat back on. I am not going to do it today. I have 4 other villages in this district and yours is the only one that appears to be getting richer, and a man in my position would be a fool to harvest the one field that is growing. Take a year. Take 2. Pay what you can, and when the day comes, I will tell you first, and I will come alone, and I will bring the paper and not men, because I have never yet needed men. He got back on Duchess and he went down the tallow road at a walk. And May, who had been standing in the bakehouse door through all of it with her arms folded and flour to the elbows, came up with the only thing anybody could think of. Well, he seems nice. I sat up that night with Ilna and Belle and Greta Ash and we went through it, and every way we turned it, it came out the same. We could not pay 450 silver in a year or in 3. And there was no argument to be had, because there was nothing false in the paper. It was Greta who found the crack, because Greta had spent 12 years reading Dramore's accounts and she reads a document the way Wilder reads ground. A household that cannot answer. Read it again. Not a person. A household. He cannot place a woman out of a household that has a head to answer for it. So we need heads of households. We need husbands. There was a silence in that room that I would give a good deal to have back and watch from the outside, because I was the only man in Senate over the age of 9, and it took me about 4 seconds longer than everybody else to arrive. Absolutely not. It is a paper. It is a line on a paper. It costs you nothing. It costs them everything. Do you understand what you are asking me to do? Every one of these women was sold or taken or married off by somebody once already, and you want me to put my name on top of them all like a man stamping sacks? And that, as it happens, is the only time in my life I have ever seen Ilna genuinely angry with me. She stood up and put both hands on the table. You do not get to decide that for us. Not that one. Anything else? Not that one. You have been in this village some months and you have decided a great many things and most of them were good, and this is not yours. May will ask. Every woman here will say yes or no to May, out loud, and whatever she says is what happens, and if half of them say no then half of them say no and we find something else for those. Then she sat back down and went on, in a completely different voice, and by the way, I am going to say yes, and you are going to be insufferable about it, so brace yourself. May went round the village over 4 days with a stool, because her knees were bad and she was not going to stand in doorways. She sat down in each house and asked the question the same way every time, and Belle wrote down the answers, and I was not allowed within 100 yards of any of it, which was correct. 61 said yes. 19 said no. 6 wanted a day and then came back with yes. 4 asked whether it meant what they thought it meant and May told them it did not, and 2 of those said yes and 2 said no. Dove was one of the no, and she came and gave it to me herself so that I would not hear it second hand, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. I have had a man decide what I am for. He was very polite about it too at the start. I would rather take the risk. That is yours to take, and nothing about it changes anything about your place here. I know. That is why I could put it to you. The wedding was on a Thursday and it lasted from noon to dusk, and it was the single most ridiculous thing that has ever happened in the Ashmarches. We did it in the longhouse because it rained. Belle had written out the wording on a board, and the wording was one sentence, deliberately, because Greta had gone through the crown form and worked out the smallest number of words that would stand up. May read it. I gave my part 67 times. 67 women gave theirs. Nobody kissed anybody. That had been established in advance, in writing, by Greta, who is not a romantic. What actually happened was that it turned into a party approximately 4 names in, because May had made 300 small cakes over 2 days, and there was meat from Nien's bees. And by the 20th name people were shouting encouragement, and by the 40th Poppy had organized a sort of running commentary, and by the 60th Corvinash was crying, which nobody has ever let him forget. Halfway through, Wilder came in out of the rain with a look on his face and put a thing down on the table in front of me. The hearth had paid mid-ceremony. It was a flat box with a handle, and on the front were 2 knobs and a row of holes, and there was a cord coming out of it with a thing on the end that Wilder named as being for talking into. He turned a knob. It made a noise like a wounded ox. Every person in the long house went flat on the floor. Then he turned the other knob and it played music. I have no idea what the song was. Nobody does. It had drums in it and a woman singing very fast in his language, and it went on for 2.5 minutes. And by the end of it 30 people were dancing, and May had her hands over her ears, and Belle had lost her place on the board entirely, and we had to start the last 7 weddings over again. The box worked for 9 days and then it died. Wilder took it apart and looked inside and put it back together. There is nothing in this world that can feed it. We buried it under the flagpole, which was Poppy's idea, and there is a stone on it, and children still ask about it. And the hearth was warm every single night for 2 weeks. Not once a night. 4 times. 6 times. It paid for the weddings the way it had never paid for anything, because 67 households had gone from being a woman alone in a house to a household with a name on it, and whatever the hearth actually measures, that is the thing it measures hardest. And when we walked the line again, the wall had gone out 4 miles in every direction. I want to put that plainly. On the morning before that Thursday, Wilder could go 2 miles north and 4 miles west. On the morning after, he could stand on the ridge above Ox Cross and look down into Draymore, and he could walk the tallow road as far as the Cinderholm turning, and he could put himself on the high ground above our own charcoal pits and cover every cutting party in the sill. The paper marriages did not save us from Auchinpel. They doubled the reach of the only weapon we had. Ilna worked that out on the walk back from the boundary and stopped in the middle of the track. It is disgusting how well it fits. What is? That the thing that keeps us is the thing that makes us safe and the thing that makes us rich. Nothing ever fits like that. It makes me want to look under it. She was right, and it took me another year to find out how right. I should set down what my situation actually was, because people ask, and they usually ask badly. I was married on paper to 67 women, most of whom called me boy, several of whom were older than my mother, and every single one of whom had a house of her own with a door I did not go through. That was the arrangement, and it never once bent. May used to introduce me to visitors as her husband purely to watch their faces, which she did for 2 years, and which I never found funny, and which everybody else did. And there was Ilna, who was different from the first day and had been different since the road, and who did not live in my house either, and about whom I was so obviously and painfully stupid that Sura took me aside in the second winter, in the voice she uses on people with a fever. You are making a fool of yourself in a way that was becoming difficult to watch. We got there. Not that winter. That winter we built the school. Belle had been teaching 12 children their letters with a stick in the ash of the longhouse floor for 6 years, at the hour when the fire was low, in the corner where the smoke was worst. She had never asked for anything, because in a village that eats barley water you do not go begging for a building in which to work through the alphabet. What do you want? A roof and a door and light. What else? Nothing. And May, from the oven, without turning round. Tell him about the slate. There is no slate in the Ashmarches. Children learn letters in ash and the ash goes out and the letters go with it. So the school got a slate floor, which is the wrong way round and which every visitor has laughed at for 2 years. Corbin quarried it out of the shelf above Bell Rock and we laid it flat in a room 14 paces by 9 with 4 windows. And the children write on the floor with chalk in the morning and mop it in the afternoon and write on it again the next day, and Bell stands in the middle and turns round. We opened it on the shortest day of the year with 22 children in it, because 12 were ours and 10 came from Cinderholm, whose people had been quietly walking their children over the ford since the autumn without asking anybody. I can still name the first room. Fen and Alder and Tib, who became Wrens. Pip, who was not home yet and whose place Belle kept empty on the floor for a year, which I did not know about for a year. Marl and Dorrit Quist, who are Orlas, and who walked 4 miles each way in every weather for 6 years. A boy called Hosk who could not sit still and who was now the best hand on the Grey Hen. Twins called Ivy and Ash Taro, no relation to Corvin, off the river. A girl called Bramble, which is not a name, and which she chose herself at 7 and has kept. What do you want to learn? Belle asked every one of them that on the first morning and wrote the answers on the floor and mopped them off at dusk. Hosk wrote boats. Bramble wrote everything. Tib wrote that he did not know and could he go home, and Belle gave him terms, which were that he could go home the moment he could read the word home, and he was reading by the spring. And the hearth paid for the school for 7 straight nights, which is the longest run it ever gave us. And one of the things it gave us was a wooden box of 200 colored sticks that draw in every color there is, and Belle has rationed them like medicine for 2 years and there are 5 left. Then in the spring Cass had to answer at Marrowford, and I went with her, and so did May, and so did Belle, and so did Poppy, who was not asked and who came anyway. Was it a trial? It was not. I want to be accurate, because I have heard this given out with a courtroom in it and there was no courtroom. It was a room over the market house with the Reeve Mab and Crake at a table, and Halder Vosk on one bench with 2 men from Draymore, and us on the other, and the Baroness Ivymar sitting at the side by the window with her hip propped on a cushion, saying nothing at all for 2 hours. Vosk spoke for a long time. He was good. He talked about his son, and he did not exaggerate, and about half of it was true. Sennet had put an unlicensed work in the river. His boy had gone across to speak to them about it. A woman had killed him from ambush in the dark. Then Crake turned it over to Cass, and Cass, who was 20 by then and who had not slept in 4 days, gave it in about 12 sentences. And the 12 sentences were exactly what happened, and she did not soften where she came down off the ridge on purpose to get close, because she is not built for softening. And then Belle stood up, and Belle had brought a thing with her wrapped in cloth, and she unwrapped it on the table. It was a shovel with a bent blade. This is what a man hit me with. I am 52 years old. I was standing in the door of a house that I sleep in. There were 15 of them and they had torches and they set the timber before they touched me, and after they knocked me down one of them took hold of a girl of 14 by the arm. And I would like somebody in this room to ask what he meant to do with her, because nobody has asked yet. Nobody asked. Halder Vosk sat looking at the table. Crake let the silence run a while, which I have always thought was deliberate, and then he found for Sennet on the killing and against Sennet on the affray, and confirmed the 90 silver we had already paid, and turned Cass loose, and put it to her in front of Vosk that she should not come back to his district under arms. And on the way out, at the bottom of the market house stairs, Ivymar caught my sleeve with 2 fingers and got out one sentence without stopping. 7 copper. You were going to come back to me at 7. Come tomorrow. I came the next morning and she had 4 people in the room, and that was the day Sennet stopped being a village and started being a business. The 4 people were a carter called Dilly Knock, who ran 2 wagons on the tallow road and hated the guild, a chandler, a woman from the tannery who bought bark, and a man in grey who did not give his name and who I later learned kept the accounts for the Marrowford Smiths. Mar put it to them flat. Sennet delivers at 7, on its own carts, to your door, on the 2nd and 4th days. The guild will drop to 7 inside a month and then Sennet will be dead and you will be back at 11 by the autumn. So the question in this room is whether 4 of you will sign for 3 years at 8 and keep signing when the guild offers you 5. The chandler said 8 was more than 7. Yes, said Mar. That is what it costs to still have a second cellar in 2 years. Do the sum on 11 copper for a fair number of years and work out how much you have paid for the pleasure of never doing arithmetic. Dilly Knock signed first. He signed because he hated the guild, which is a better reason than most contracts ever get. That was our first real money, and it changed us faster than anything that came after. 400 sacks a month at 8, from the second summer, on 3 carts we owned, over a ford we owned, at a 40th to the Baroness. Here is what we bought with the first year of it, in order, because the order is the argument. A second pair of oxen. A proper granary with a stone floor and a slate roof. 22 sides. The iron for the mill. The mill. We built our own mill on the colt below Bell Rock in the second summer and it took 14 weeks and Corvinash made the gudgeons and the ironwork and a man from Marrowford came up and cut the stones. And on the day the wheel first turned May stood in the doorway and cried in front of everybody and drove us all out of her way. Sennet has ground its own grain since. Draymore's mill lost a third of its trade in a season, because Cinderholm came to us, and then the 2 little places up the Sill Road came to us, because we charged a 12th and Draymore charged a third, and there is no argument in the world against that. And then, because the mill was there and the Ford was there and the carts were there, and because people were already walking in, we opened the shop. That was Greta. Entirely Greta. She came to me at the end of the second summer. There are 30 people a day coming over that Ford now to grind or to buy charcoal or to sell a spark, and that every one of them then walked 2 days to Mariford to buy salt and needles and thread and nails, and that this was idiotic. We do not have salt or needles or thread. We have a cart going to Mariford twice a month, empty on the way home. It was a shed with a counter for the first year. Salt, thread, needles, nails, lamp oil, tin cups, and one shelf of things out of the hearth that nobody could identify and that sold anyway, at prices Greta made up on the spot, mostly to people from Draymore who wanted to be able to claim they had one. And Greta priced it the way Mar had taught me, and I had not really understood until I watched Greta do it. She sold at the Mariford price minus the 2 days walking, and she never once moved the price for anybody. And within a year every farmer in the district knew that the shed at Senate did not haggle and did not cheat and did not run out of salt, and that is a kind of power that no rifle has ever had. I want to put down what was actually on those shelves in the third year, because people imagined something grander than it was. Salt from the Kello pans. Thread, black and white only. Needles. Nails in 4 sizes and a bucket of bent ones at half. Lamp oil in a stone jar with a wooden dipper. Tin cups off a tinker called Ossibream who came through twice a year with a dog called Marrow. Then a shelf of Mariford things that Greta brought back because the cart was going anyway. Blue thread, which sold out every time. Combs. A jar of the hard green sweets they make at Stowe. Boot blacking. Fish hooks from Ferry Bank in 3 sizes. And the strange shelf, which had no name and which everybody in the district called the strange shelf. A grey box that made a small clicking noise when you turned it and which Corvin Ash was forbidden to open. 4 of the wrong brass cylinders. A pair of spectacles with dark glass. A flat card with a picture on it of a woman standing on a beach. What is she standing on? Sand. Greta gave them that every time, in exactly the same voice, and they would look at it a while longer and put it down and buy salt. Old Bird Kettle from Long Meg came several miles for lamp oil and stayed 4 hours. A carter called Nibash, no relation, bought nails on credit for 2 years and paid every copper. A woman from the Grey ING quarry called Fern Poole bought a comb the first year, a mirror the second, and 16 pounds of powder the third, and now runs the powder store there. Draymore women crossed at Ox Cross to shop at Senate. That is the sentence Halder Vosk had to live with, starting in the 3rd autumn, and it did more to him than the arrow did. And the last of the 4 was the Hurt House, and the Hurt House is Sura's, and it is the only one of them I had nothing to do with. She had been the herb woman's girl at Holloway for 4 years, which means she had watched proper physicians work and had never once been allowed to touch anybody. In Senate she started with a shed and a bench and the satchel she had stolen on the day we were thrown out. What she had that nobody else in the marches had was the boiling. Wilder taught her that, in the 2nd month, when Cass burned her arm on the first charcoal pit. He made her boil the cloth. He made her boil the water. He made her boil the knife and he made her wash her hands until she was angry with him, and when she wanted a reason, he did not entirely have one, that there were small things in dirt too small to see and that this was simply what everybody where he came from did, and that he had seen men die of a scratch and men live through a hole through the leg, and the difference was almost always this. Sura believed him about 8 months before she had proof. Then she had proof for 2 years running, and by the 3rd year she had a building with 4 beds and a copper and a stove and 2 girls learning off her. And people were coming to Senate from as far as the Cinder Home Road with wounds they would previously have died of quietly at home. She charged nothing. That was her one condition, and I never argued it, because Greta worked out inside a season that a woman who walks a few miles to have her arm cleaned by salt on the way out. Who came? Everybody, in the end, and the order they came in is the whole history of the district. First our own. Then Cinderholm, because Orla Quist has never been proud about anything. Then a charcoal burner called What Rees who put a splitting axe through his own foot and who was the first man Sura ever sewed. Then Long Meg, when Nan Tilly's husband went under a cart. Then the Grey ING quarry, all at once, after a fall took 9 men in one morning and Sura and 2 girls worked in a barn for 2 days and brought 6 of them home. Then Draymore, at night, 1 at a time, for a year, before Halder Vosk ever crossed that water himself. Where does it hurt, and how long has it been like that, and what did you put on it? Those are the 3 questions, and she has put them to about 4,000 people in exactly the same order every time, and the 3rd one is the one that matters, because it is usually clay, and the clay is usually why they are there. So that was Senate at the end of the 2nd year. A ford, a mill, a forge, a shop, a school, a herd house, 6 charcoal pits, 4 niter beds that smelled like the end of the world, and 1 man on a hill with 37 pieces of brass. 37. He had fired 4 in 2 years, all of them into things and not people, all of them at night, all of them to make a point to somebody standing where they should not be standing. The whole district thought we had a garrison. And then the sulfur, and the smoking pans, and the thing in the burn, and that was the first time I nearly got everybody killed. The smoking pans are 14 miles into the sill on the north edge where the ground drops into a basin, and every child in the marches grows up on them and no adult has been near them in 90 years. Hot water comes up out of the rock there in about 40 pools. The stone round the pools is yellow. That is the whole miracle, and I had heard about it the way you hear about anything you have decided is a story, and it was Bell who put it together, because Bell had heard the Cinderhome version, which mentions the smell of eggs. Sulfur smells of eggs when it burns. Wilder got there first and Corvin nodded and I sat down. We had charcoal by the ton. We had niter coming in a year. And 14 miles north through dead trees there was a basin with yellow rock round the edges of it, and nobody had walked in there since before anybody's grandmother. Wilder could not come. That is the thing I should have thought about harder than I did. The smoking pans were 9 miles outside the boundary and there was not going to be a house out there. He walked us to the wall and stopped at it and stood there while we went on, and I looked back once and he had not moved. 11 of us went. Me, Corbin Ash, Cass with the bow, Poppy because she would not be left, and 7 others, with 2 sledges and a good many empty barrels and 4 days of food. The sill is different when you are in the middle of it. The edge of it is trees. The middle of it is a grey room 9 miles wide with a ceiling of dead branches, and the ash on the floor is a foot deep in places and it takes your footprints and keeps them. And the whistling is not on the outside anymore, it is all round you, and it changes note when you change direction. On the second night one of the women, Hala, leaned over. Have you ever wondered what burned it? Nobody knows. 90 years. Something that big does not just stop. Fires stop when they run out. There is 9 miles of wood standing in here that never burned. So it did not run out. It stopped. I had nothing for her and I did not sleep well, and I have never once forgotten that Hala is the one who put it, because of what happened to Hala afterwards. The pans were everything I hoped. 40 pools of water hot enough to scald, in a basin of grey mud, and round every one of them a crust of bright yellow crystal an inch thick that came off with a bar and sheets like ice on a bucket. We filled 15 barrels in a day and a half and it was the easiest money anybody in Senate ever made. And on the second afternoon Poppy came down off the rim of the basin in a completely level voice that I did not like at all. There are tracks. They were not wolf. Corvin had been a smith for 20 years and had shod horses for hunters and knew every track in the marches, and he crouched over this one for a long time and then stood up. I do not know what that is and I want to go home now. 4 toes. A hand span across. Sunk 2 inches into ground that took my boot half an inch. And the ash inside the print was glazed. Not burnt. Glazed, like the inside of a pot, as if whatever had put its foot down had put it down hot. We went home fast and we went home in the wrong order, which was my fault, because I put the sledges in front and the bow at the back and I did not think about the fact that a sledge track through ash is a road. It came on us in the middle of the second morning about 6 miles out. I am going to describe it once and then not again, because I saw it for about 4 seconds and I have never wanted to see it a fifth. It was the color of the ash and it was the size of a bull and it went between 2 trunks without touching either of them, and where it passed the bark smoked. It took a woman called Rue off the back sledge. There was no fight. There was no moment where anybody could have done anything. It came out of the gray and it went back into the gray and Rue was not there anymore. Cass put 4 arrows into the place it had gone and the arrows came back out of the ash burning. We ran 15 barrels of sulfur 2 miles through dead forest and left 4 of them behind, and it followed us for an hour, and the only reason any of us reached the boundary is that Corvin Ash stopped, in the middle of it, and made everybody stop, and had us light the 4th barrel. Not sulfur. He tipped out a barrel and filled it with dry ash and bark and lit it and rolled it back down our own track, and the smoke went up in a wall behind us, and whatever it was would not come through the smoke. We came out of the sill at dusk. Wilder was standing at the wall exactly where we had left him 4 days before, and Sura gave me afterwards that he had gone out to it 3 times a day. 11 went in. 10 came out. I stood on the green that night and put it to the whole village that I had taken some people 9 miles outside our own line for a barrel of yellow rock, and that I had put the bow at the back and the sledges in front, and that Rue was dead because of the order I walked people in. Nobody spoke. May came and put a cup in my hand. And Ilna came out afterwards and found me and gave me the hardest thing anybody has ever put to me, and she put it kindly, which made it worse. You are going to do this again. Not that. Something like it. You are 23 and you have found out that you can make things happen, and that is a drug, and everybody who ever had it did this exactly once and then either learned or kept doing it. So learn it now while it is only rue. Only rue. She got it out with her voice completely flat and then she went inside and I heard her through the wall about 10 minutes later, and I sat on the step until it got light. We named the north cutting after Rue. The sill has a Rue's corner in it now and the Carters use the name and have no idea where it came from. We did not go back to the pans for a year. When we did we went with 40 people, a stockade, and every axe in the village, and we cut a bare circle out of the dead trees before anybody slept, because smoke was the only thing it had ever refused. Wilder walked in with us and sat 3 nights on the spoil with the rifle across his knees and never once fired it. On the 3rd night it came to the edge of the firelight and stood there and the bark behind it smoked. Corvin rolled a burning barrel down the slope and it went back into the grey. We built the hut, and a man from Cinderholm called Bick Oro slept in it, and the stone paid that week. The pans have been a place people work in ever since. Nobody goes in alone and nobody goes in without smoke, and twice a year a carter finds a print with the ash glazed inside it and the whole marches has heard by supper. But we had 11 barrels of yellow rock on the green at Senate, and the barrels were the point. Now, black powder. I have had this explained to me 5 different ways by 4 different people and I still only half understand it, so I will give it the way Wilder gave it to the village, standing on the hearthstone with a stick. 3 things. Charcoal burns. Sulfur burns easier and lower. Saltpetre is the one that matters, because saltpetre carries the air inside it, so the fire does not have to wait for the wind. Grind all 3 fine, mix them wet so they do not blow up while you are mixing them, press the paste into a cake, dry it, and break the cake into grains. The size of the grain decides how fast it burns. Fine as flour and it goes off in your hand. Coarse as barley and it pushes. We had a year to wait for the niter. So we spent the year building the thing that would use it. Corvin Ash and Wilder argued about that gun for a fair number of months and it is the best thing I have ever watched 2 people do. Wilder wanted rifling and a breech and a screw thread, and every week Corvin would take him out to the forge and show him what the iron would actually do, and every week Wilder would come back with something smaller. In the end what they built was not clever at all, which is why it worked. A tube, 9 feet of it, made of hammer-welded strap wound round a mandrel and hoop like a barrel, walls 2 inches thick at the breech and 1 at the mouth, and a touch hole, and a wooden bed with a screw under the back to lift the mouth, and 2 wheels off a cart. It threw a stone ball the size of a fist, and later a canister of scrap, and it took 4 people 2 minutes to load, and it was accurate to nothing whatsoever. They called it the Whistler because of the noise the ball makes, and because Poppy got there first, and Poppy named things in Senate for about 3 years running whether anybody liked it or not. And then the first barrel burst. They had proofed it once with a light charge out of the little we had made from a scraping of the first bed, and it held, and on the second proof Corvin put in a heavier charge, because the whole point of a proof is to find out, and the breech let go at the second hoop. Halla was standing 8 feet to the left holding the ram. Surah had her for 6 days. There was nothing to be done and everybody knew it by the second, and Surah did it anyway. And on the 6th morning she came out and sat down on the step of the herd house and did not cry, in a completely ordinary voice. I am going to need a proper building, with light, and a room where people could die that is not the same room where children come to have splinters out. That is how the herd house got its second room. Corvin Ash did not speak for 9 days. He went into the forge on the 10th and started again, and the second tube had 4 more hoops and a breech plug that Wilder had drawn 11 times. And Corvin proofed that one alone, at night, from behind a bank, with a slow match on a pole, and he did it several times before he let anybody near it. Halla's name is on it. He cut it into the iron behind the touch hole with a chisel and never mentioned it, and I did not notice for a month. The niter came up in the second autumn. Wilder had turned those beds every fortnight for 18 months and he took the first scraping himself, and we leached it through ash lye in the old dye troughs and boiled it down in May's biggest copper, which she surrendered under protest and got back ruined. And what came out of the bottom of that copper was a grey crust that we scraped and washed and boiled again, and the second time it came out white. We had about 12 pounds. It had taken a year and a half and every goat in the village and the entire goodwill of 86 women. We made 3 pounds of powder from it and we took the Whistler down to the flat below Bell Rock at dawn with the whole village standing on the bank behind us at what Wilder considered a safe distance and what everybody else considered an insult. Corvin loaded it. Wilder laid it on an old ash stump at 200 paces. Poppy, who was 17 by then and who had carried every barrel of that stinking business up that hill on a sledge, was given the match, and she looked at me, and I nodded, and she put it to the touch hole. The noise went out across the water and came back off the sill twice, the way the rifle had 2 years before, and the stump was not there anymore. There was about 4 seconds of absolute silence. Then 86 women started shouting at once, and May hit me on the arm hard enough to bruise, and Corbinash sat down flat on the mud with his hands over his face, and Cass ran 200 paces to look at the stump and ran back and could not get a whole sentence out. And Wilder stood by the gun with his arms folded, looking at the smoke, and he gave me the thing that I did not understand for another year. "Now you do not need me." He put it lightly. He was smiling. And I laughed and got something stupid back and went to look at the stump. Senate made powder. Not much and not well. 12 pounds of niter in the first year, then 40 in the second when we had 8 beds and had learned to keep them damp with lye instead of water, and every ounce of it went into the Whistler or into the quarry. The quarry. That is the other half, and Greta saw it before I did. Powder is not a weapon in a place like this. Powder is a way of moving rock without 30 men and a winter. We blew the slate shelf above Bell Rock in one morning and got 2 years of building stone. We blew the shallows at the Cinderholm Bend and put 3 feet on the depth and made the colt carryable by flatboat from Senate to Mariford, which took 2 days off every load we ever sent, and which is the single most profitable thing I have done in my life. And then people started asking to buy it, and that is when the trouble began, because up to that point everything we had done was somebody else's problem in a small way, and powder made us everybody's problem all at once. The first man who came to buy was from the Mariford Smiths, and Greta sold him 15 pounds at a price she made up in her head that I later worked out was 4 times what it cost us. The second man came from a mine at Coldwater, 3 days west, and he bought 40 pounds and asked, very casually, at the end, whether we would consider selling the making of it instead of the powder. Greta gave him no in 5 words and a cup of tea. The third man did not come to buy anything. He came in a green coat with 2 servants and a horse worth more than our mill, and he sat down on the bench outside the shop and waited until I was fetched. And when I came he stood up and shook my hand and gave me his name, which was Orrin Fell, and that he was the master of the Tallow Guild at Mariford, and that he had been meaning to come and see us for 2 years and had been putting it off because he had not believed the reports. He was about 45 and he had the easiest manner of any man I have ever dealt with, and he was the most dangerous person who ever walked into that village, including the ones who came with soldiers. "You sell charcoal at 8. I sell at 9 now, and I have been losing money at 9 for 14 months, and I can go on losing it for another 4 years, and you know that, and I know that you know it. So let us skip the stage where I threaten you and you are brave. What comes after that? What comes after that is that I buy your charcoal. All of it. At 8, at your Ford, forever, and I sell it wherever I like, and you never load a cart again. You would make more money than you make now and you would sleep at night. And Mariford goes back to 11 copper inside 2 years. Mariford goes back to 11 copper inside 2 years, he agreed pleasantly. Yes. That is what the arrangement is for. Then he looked round the green, at the school with the children's noise coming out of it, and the shop, and the forge, and the mill wheel turning down the hill, and the pink stone bird on the pole, and he gave me the thing that showed me exactly what kind of fight I was in. You have built a very fine village. I hear you built it in 3 years from nothing, and I believe it, because I can see the mortar. Here is what I want you to think about tonight. Everything you have built is on one road, over one ford, into one town. That is a bottle. And I am not going to break your bottle. I am simply going to put my thumb over the neck of it and wait. He was right. That is the thing about Orrin Fell. He was right about everything he ever gave me, and he gave me the truth every single time, because the truth was working for him. One road. One ford. One town. Everything we had built went down the Tallow Road to Mariford and sold there or did not sell at all, and Fell owned the wagon yard at the Saltgate, and the Way House on Bridge Row, and half the debts of the carters who came up our road. I sat in the long house that night with the people who mattered and I put the question badly and Greta fixed it for me. How do we break his hold on Mariford? We do not. Greta did not look up from her book. Mariford is his town and it will be his town in 10 years. Ask the other question. What other question? Where else can a sack of charcoal go? So we got Bell's biggest board and we drew the marches on it, and we stared at it for 4 nights, and by the 4th night the board had turned into something none of us had expected, because when you draw where things can go instead of where things do go, the map turns inside out. Northwest, 3 days over the moor, was Coldwater, which is a mine and about 600 people and no trees at all for 2 days in any direction, and which had been buying its charcoal off the guild for as long as anybody could remember, at whatever the guild charged for hauling it 3 extra days. North, up the Sill Road, were 2 small places called Long Meg and Kettle Hill that were not on anybody's list of anything. And southeast, down the Colt, past Marrowford entirely, was the whole lower river, and boats. Hob Taro was the man for that. He is a river carrier out of a place called Ferry Bank with a flat boat called the Grey Hen and a bad temper and a wife who does the talking. And he had been pulling that boat empty past Senate for years because there had never been anything at Senate to pick up. I went to him with a proposition and he turned it down flat. Then I gave him the sentence Greta had made me learn. What if we blew the shallows? Hob Taro put down his tea. What do you mean, blue? 6 weeks later the Cinderholm Bend had 3 feet more water in it and the Grey Hen came up to Bell Rock for the first time in the history of the river. And Hob Taro stood in the bow of his own boat outside our ford looking up at our mill wheel with his hat in his hands. And then he became the second most useful person in this story, and he never once thanked me for the river, because he had decided that the river had always been like that. Boats changed the arithmetic completely. A cart takes 15 sacks in 2 days. The Grey Hen takes 90 and takes them past Marrowford to Ferry Bank and Stowe and the whole lower water where Orenfell had never bothered to price anything because nobody had ever competed with him down there. And carts still had to go north, because there is no river to Coldwater. So we built the road. We did not exactly build it. What we actually did was put 4 huts on it, 1 day apart, and that is where the whole thing became something other than trade. And it happened because Ilna made a joke. We were walking the moor track to Coldwater in the spring, 4 of us with a sample load, and it was miserable. And she got out, only half joking, that if there were a house every day on this road then Wilder could walk it, and then she stopped in the middle of the track because she had hurt herself. Every roof we build is range. So the 4 huts on the Coldwater Road were not way houses. They were a wall going west. Each one had a hearth and a roof and a family in it, and each one paid us when the family first slept easy. And each one moved the line 4 more miles. And by the end of that summer Marcus Wilder could walk from the smoking pans to the gates of Coldwater without ever leaving the reach of the stone. We named them as we went. Rue's Corner, which was already named. Kettle Hill, which was already a place. Long Meg, after a standing stone that leans. The 4th had no name until Dilly Knock's wagon lost a wheel outside it in the rain and he sat in the doorway 2 days swearing. And after that everybody called it Knock's Rest, including Dilly, who lives in a hut on a moor road. People who have run out of other places, and the marches turned out to be full of them. Ivet Sarl and her brother Toom, off a farm at Grey Ing their landlord had taken back. Nan Tilly's cousin Wick and his 3 boys. Gorse the fiddler and his wife Beth, whose geese are the reason nobody has ever robbed Long Meg. Knock's Rest went to a man who would not give us a name, who came in off the moor in the second winter with a burnt hand and stayed 9 days in the herd house. Surra called him 9. Everybody calls him 9. He has fed every carter, every wren, and every stray on that road, and last spring he pulled a Coldwater collier called Merritt Pie out of a drift alive at 3 in the morning, and he still will not give anybody a name. Do you want anything for it? I asked him once. More lamp oil, he said, and that was the whole of the conversation. Dilly Knock is worth a minute. He is about 50, missing 3 fingers on the left hand, runs 2 wagons and a few mules, and he was the first man in Marrowford to sign Ivy Mar's paper. And he did it because he hates the guild, and he hates the guild because Orenfell's father bought his father's yard at auction in a bad winter. He is also the reason the Post exists. He came into the shop one afternoon in the 3rd summer and complained, at length, that he had carried the same message up the Coldwater Road 3 times because nobody at Coldwater could get a reply back down, and that he was not a boy with a stick. Greta looked at him. Then she looked at Finn, who was 12 and sitting on the counter eating an apple she had not paid for. 2 months later Senate had 6 ponies and 9 children and a shed, and the children rode the Coldwater Road and the Tallow Road in relays, 1 hut to the next. And Belle would not let any of them ride who could not read, which is the most effective school attendance policy anybody has ever invented in the Ash Marches. Poppy named them the Wrens. Finn rode the West Road on a pony called Nettle. Alder, who is Tessa's nephew, rode the River Run. Tib rode nothing for the first 4 months because Tib could not read, and then Tib could read. They carried letters at a copper, and they carried them faster than anything else in the province, and inside a year the merchants at Ferry Bank were writing to the mine at Coldwater through a shed in an elf village, and I did not have to explain to anybody why that mattered. And then Corvin Ash made us mirrors, which was Wilder's idea and Corvin's execution and Poppy's obsession. Glass we could do badly by then. There is good sand in the Cold Bend and we had ash in a furnace that already ran hot for the forge, and our glass is green and full of bubbles and useless for windows, and it takes silvering perfectly well if you do not mind seeing yourself in a swamp. 4 mirrors. One on the Senate Church Knoll, one on Kettle Hill, one on the ridge above Ox Cross, one on the shoulder over the smoking pans. Sun on a mirror, a board to cover it, and a coat of long and short that Poppy wrote, and that bell then made every child in the school learn as a game. The first message ever sent by the Senate mirrors went from Kettle Hill to the Green in about 40 seconds, and it read, in full, "Tib is an idiot." The second one, 3 weeks later, read Writers 12 OX Cross, and it arrived 20 minutes before the writers did. And after that nobody in the village ever complained about the children playing with mirrors again. That was the summer everything was working, and I remember standing on the Green with the mirrors going and thinking that I had never had a summer like it. Ren came home in the autumn, and how do you write down a thing like that? Ilna's sister. Taken to Dremor at 17, 6 years in the Vosk house, and after Haldervosk lost his son and then his mill trade and then his kitchen girl, he had less and less to spend on keeping people. And one morning she simply walked over the ford at Ox Cross with a bundle and stood on our Green. I want to be careful here, because Ren is alive and this is her business as much as mine. She was 23. She was not broken and she was not fine. She had spent 6 years in a house where the way you stay safe is to be useful to the person who owns the house, and she had got extremely good at it, and nobody had ever let her know she could stop. Ilna took her in. The village took her in. May fed her for a fortnight, and within a month Ren had made herself useful in the only place where usefulness was scarce, which was the powder work, and she was good at it, better than good. She had hands like a jeweler and she was not afraid of the mill, and by midwinter she was running the corning shed, and in the spring she went to Coldwater with a load and did not come back with the cart. Nessa Bird runs Coldwater. She is not a head woman and there is no head woman there. She owns the Deep Sister, which is the biggest of the 3 shafts, and she employs about 200 of the 600 people in the place. And she is 60 and small and had been buying our charcoal for a year and a half and paying on the day, which in that country makes you practically a saint. She had also asked me, twice, to sell her the making of the powder, and both times Greta had given no in a very few words, so she bought it from Ren instead. She did not steal it. That is what took me the longest to swallow. She offered a woman a house and a wage and the running of a works and did it openly, and Ren took it, and Ren was not our property and never had been, and she had spent 6 years in a place where nobody ever offered her anything at all. Ilna went to Coldwater. 3 days over the moor. She came back 4 days later and she did not talk about it for 2 months, and then she talked about it once, at night, in about 6 sentences. Come home. What for? I had nothing that was not about me. So I gave her that I was glad she had a house, and I came back. The Coldwater Works were making powder inside the year, and they were making it badly at first and then well, and Nessa Bird sold it at half our price because she had a mine full of men who needed it for rock, and she had no interest whatever in what happened to Senate. We lost the powder trade in a season. Everything Greta had built out of it, the second flatboat, the money we had promised Sura for the new herd house, the iron order for the mill at Long Meg, all of it went sideways in about 9 weeks. Corvin Ash wanted to send men. Corvin is a gentleman and he came to me in the forge with a face I had not seen on him and asked, straight out, whether we were going to let a woman walk our own work over a moor and sell it. We are. Why? Because there is nothing at the end of the other road except us being Dremor. He hammered for a while. Then he put the better question, the one I had been avoiding for a week. What do we have that she cannot buy off somebody? And I had nothing that night. I had one about a month later, and it came out of the herd house, and it came out of Sura, and it is the whole reason Senate is still here. But first the trouble, because trouble came in the same season, the way it always does. Ashen Pell came back in the 2nd week of the harvest, alone, on Duchess, exactly as he had promised. He took his hat off at the Green. He wanted to know about the school. He admired the mill. Then he sat down on the hearthstone again and took out a folded paper, and this time there was a second paper under it, and the second one was a list. He had given me the truth 2 years before. He had waited. He had let us get rich. And now he had come with a list of every household in Senate without a head, and he read the first name off it, and then he stopped and looked up, because I had not moved and had not gone pale. You have been busy. 67 of them. From behind me came Greta, with the crown form in her hand. Registered at Marrowford, 2nd and 4th days, over 2 years, stamped by the Reeve. Every name on your list is in a household with a head who answers. He read the whole list anyway. He was thorough. He went down it in that soft polite voice, and each time Greta gave the same 4 words: married in the 3rd year, married in the 2nd year, married in the 1st. And by the 4th name the whole green had gone quiet, and by the 10th name Poppy had started laughing and had to be taken away. And in the middle of it, which was May's doing entirely and not mine, they started a wedding. We had one that day. We usually had one every month or two by then, because women were walking in from other villages by that point and joining a place where a woman could hold a house. That day it was a widow from Long Meg called Sabra, and the paper had been ready for a fortnight. So while Ashenpel stood on our green reading a list of women he could not touch, May started the ceremony behind him with a board and a cup, and the village turned round to watch it, because a wedding is more interesting than a list. He got to the end. He folded the paper. He stood there for a moment in a crowd that had its back to him. Then he put one question to me, and it was the only genuine thing he ever gave me. How long did it take you to think of it? I did not think of it. A woman called Greta Ash read your license more carefully than you have read it in a good many years, and another woman called Ilna made sure it was asked properly, and I was against it. He nodded slowly and put his hat on. Then he put it, quite pleasantly, that there was a debt of 450 silver still standing against the village of Senate as a body, and that a body can be distrained even where a person cannot, and that he would be back for the ford, and the mill, and the shop. And Greta, who had known that was coming since the first visit, handed him the 3rd paper, which was the deed by which every one of those works stood in the name of the Baroness Ivymar, leased back to Senate at a 40th, and had done since the day we licensed the ford. Ashenpel looked at it for a long time. I have been at this work for 19 years. In 19 years nobody has ever handed me 3 papers. He got on the mule and rode down the Tallow Road, and he did not come back to Senate, and that is the whole of what happened to him. And there was no shouting, and nobody was punished, and no one has ever made a song about it. He went on collecting debts in 4 other districts for another 2 years, and then he sold his license and bought an inn at Stowe. I know that because a wren rode past it once and brought back the name. It is called the Ram and Bucket. He is well liked, by all accounts. That is what people find unsatisfying, and I understand. Ashenpel walked away whole. But the thing he came for, 450 silver and 30 women, walked out of his hands 1 paper at a time in front of a wedding, and he had to stand in the middle of a green with his hat in his hand and be less interesting than a cake. I would not trade that for a hanging, and I would like to record what Greta Ash charged Senate for the work of the previous 3 years, which she presented to me on a folded paper of her own that same night, and which read, in full, 1 window with real glass, for the shop, before winter. She got it in 18 days. It is still there. It is green and bubbled, and you cannot see through it properly, and it is the 2nd most valuable object in the village. The most valuable was in a case under Wilder's bed, and that autumn somebody put an arrow into him while he slept. It was Piper Doone, the miller's boy. 16 when he lay in the bracken counting our roofs, and 19 when he came over the water at night with his father's bow. In between, the Draymore mill had lost Cinderholm, then Long Meg, then Kettle Hill, then half of Draymore itself, and Gart Doone had sold his 2nd horse and then his good stones. And there is a particular kind of young man who watches that happen to his father and does not blame the arithmetic. He got within 30 paces of the long house because we were fat and happy, and the watch that night was 2 women and a dog called Scrap. And he shot through the open shutter at a shape on a bed, and the shape was Wilder, and the arrow went in under the collar bone and out again below the shoulder blade. He did not run far. Scrap had him against the bakehouse wall inside a minute, and Cass had him on the ground inside too, and the whole thing was over before anyone had lit a lamp. I got there and Wilder was sitting on the edge of the bed with an arrow through him, telling Sura, in a perfectly level voice, where to cut. Do not pull it. Snap the head, push it through. There is nothing in there that will kill me in the next hour. Boil the knife first. Boil it properly. Are you listening to me? I am listening to you, said Sura, and then she told him to stop talking and be a patient, and he did, and I have never seen anybody obey Sura before or since with that little argument. He was on that bed for 7 weeks. The first 3 of them he was somewhere else entirely. The wound went bad on the 4th day the way they do, and Sura opened it again and washed it out with boiled water and honey out of Nian's 9 hives, and sat with him through 2 nights, and on the 2nd night he talked a great deal in his own language and twice in ours, and what he said in ours was a girl's name. The village found out what we had inside a week. Not the wound. What we had. Because on the morning after the arrow, Haldervosk knew, because his miller's son had gone across the water with a bow and had not come home, and everybody in Draymore knew what that meant. The Thunder Man was down. Came on the 4th day with 110 men. Everything about that morning was numbers. Draymore was down to 900 people from 1300, and of the men who could carry anything, 110 came out with him and about 40 stayed home, and the 40 who stayed home mattered more than the 110, and Haldervosk had not understood that yet. They came up the Tallow Road to Ox Cross and then they turned north along the bank towards Bell Rock, because Bell Rock is where the fort is and the mill is and the works are. And because Vosk had spent 2 years being told by everybody what a fool he had been not to break that ford when there were 30 people building it. Kettle Hill Mirror caught them at the turn. For longs and 2 shorts, which is the signal Poppy wrote for riders on the river road, and it came into the green at about 6:30 in the morning, and we had 20 minutes. 20 minutes, and a man on a bed who could not stand up. Here is what Senate actually had that morning, and I list it because for 2 years everybody in the marches had assumed we had something else. 1 whistler on a cart bed with 30 pounds of powder and about 40 stone balls and 2 canisters of scrap that Corvin had made in a bad temper and nobody had ever fired. 9 bows. Cass had trained 9, and of the 9, 4 could actually shoot. The ground. 2 years of quarrying above Bell Rock had left the approach to our fort a mess of spoil heaps and old faces and 1 dry channel we had cut for the mill leat and then abandoned. And Wilder had walked that ground with Cass and me sometimes over 2 summers and had made us dig 4 pits and a bank we all thought was a waste of a week. And the bell. The bell was maize. It came out of the hearth in the second spring, a squat cracked thing about the size of a bucket that Wilder said had been on a ship, and May hung it outside the bakehouse and used it to call people to bread. Everybody in 3 villages knew that sound. Bell rang it that morning without being told to, and she rang it wrong, on purpose, in the pattern the school used for a fire, over and over, and Cinderholm heard it, and Long Meg heard it a quarter of an hour later from the Kettle Hill Mirror. Cass had the ridge with 4 bows. Corvin and Poppy had the whistler behind the spoil bank at the head of the ramp with Wren's old corning crew loading. Greta had every child in the village on the far side of the mill with the ponies harnessed in orders to go to Cinderholm the moment anything came over the bank. And I stood on the ramp of my own fort where Rook Vosk had died, and I did not have a rifle, and I have never been so frightened in my life. Halder Vosk came up the bank at the head of them and stopped 40 paces out. He looked at the ramp and the spoil bank and the 9 of us he could see, and then he looked up at the west shoulder. And he looked at it for a long time, and then he looked at me. Where is he? He is where he always is. Vosk almost smiled. He is on his back in your long house with my miller's boy's arrow through him, and if he could stand you would not be standing here talking to me. There was no point at all in lying. He had 110 men and I had 4 bows. So I said the only true thing I had. If you come up this ramp you will get it. There are about 90 of us and you have 110 and you will take the ford and you will lose 30 men doing it. And then you will hold a ford in a valley where every other village buys its flour from us and gets its arms cleaned by us and sends its children to our school. What are you going to do on the second day? He did come up the ramp. Of course he did. He had buried his son and lost a mill and he had come 4 miles with 110 men and you cannot walk that back down a bank. It lasted about a quarter of an hour and it was the ugliest thing I have ever been part of. They came up in a mass because there is no other way up a ramp. Cass put 4 arrows into the front of it from the ridge and killed nobody and slowed everybody. The first pit took 2 men at the turn of the ramp and the second one took 4 more and after that they came round the outside of the spoil heap, which is exactly where Wilder had said they would come. Which is why the whistler was pointing there. Corvin fired the canister at 20 paces. I am not going to describe what that does. Corvin Ash has never fired that gun again from that day to this. He hands the match to somebody else. He has cleaned it 1,000 times and laid it 100 and he does not put fire to it. 19 men went down in front of that gun and about half of them got up again. And the rest of Draymore went off the bank and back down the river road. And they left Halder Vosk standing on our ramp on his own because he had come up in the middle of the mass the way an old man does and everybody around him had gone. Cass had him at 40 feet with the bow drawn and was waiting for me to say it. I have had 2 years to decide whether what I did next was wisdom or cowardice and I still do not know. Go home. He stood there breathing hard with our people all round him. There were 9 of them on the ground within 20 feet, and 1 of them was moving. Take your hurt. All of them. We will not touch them and we will not follow you. Surrey is in the hurt house and she will take any man you send her, tonight or in a week, and she will not ask his name. He got them onto the carts himself. It took a long time. Nobody helped and nobody stopped him, and when the last one was up he stood at the bottom of the ramp and looked back at me, and he was 61 years old and he had lost everything he had in 3 years to a boy with a book full of the word no, and he said one sentence, "You will be worse than me. Give it 20 years. Then he went home. 15 Draymore men came to the herd house over the next 9 days. Sura took all of them. 2 died. She sent the bodies back on our cart with cloths over them, the way May had sent Rook, and she sent them in daylight, and I did not tell her to do that and would not have thought of it. And Piper Dune sat in the wool shed for those 9 days with a rope on his ankle while the whole village decided what to do with him, and the whole village wanted him hanged, including me. Wilder settled it, and he settled it from a bed he could not get out of, and he was still half in a fever when he did it. I went in to tell him the boy was in the shed and that May had asked me straight out that morning, in front of 20 people, whether I was going to hang him or not, and that I did not know what to say. Wilder was quiet a while. How old? 19. Whose is he? The miller's. The mill we broke. He looked at the ceiling for so long I thought he had gone under again. Then he asked me a question I did not expect at all. Does he know how a mill works? He grew up in one. Wilder shut his eyes. Then put him in yours. Yours is going to break in the spring, because your gudgeon is soft and Corvin knows it and has not told you because he cannot make a better one yet. Put the boy in the mill and pay him and let the village look at him every day for 3 years. That is not justice. No. It is not. Justice would be hanging him. I have done a great deal of justice and it is very quick and it is completely useless. In about 4 years there will be another boy on that bank with a bow and the only question that matters is what the last one is doing. I put it to the village and the village hated it. May voted against. Cass voted against and did not speak to me for a fortnight. Tessa voted for it, and stood up and said, out loud, that she had done worse to this village than that boy had and had been asked to milk her goats, and that she would not sit still and watch him hanged for it. 61-29. He went into the mill. Piper Dune is the miller at Senate now. He is 22. He has never once said sorry to anybody and I have never asked him to, and last winter he pulled 2 children out of the leat and nearly drowned doing it, and that is the whole of what I have to say about that. The gudgeon broke in the spring, exactly as Wilder said it would. Now I have to tell the winter, because that was the winter we nearly went under, and the arrow was not even the worst of it. Wilder was on his back and the boundary did not care. The wall does not run on him, it runs on us, so it stayed where it was. But everything else stopped. We had no shooter. For a fair number of weeks the entire deterrent of the Ash Marches was a rumor and 4 bad archers, and the district found out inside a month, because districts do. We lost 2 charcoal carts on the Coldwater Road to men who had never dared before. We lost a wren, not killed, but Alder was pulled off Nettle at Long Megan beaten and the letters taken, and Nettle came home alone, and I sat in the shed with that pony and put my head against her neck and did some hard thinking, and then the fever came to Cinderholm and everything got much worse. It was a winter fever and it went through Cinderholm in 9 days and killed 4. Orla Quist, who runs Cinderholm and had been sending her children to our school for 2 years, brought the worst of them to Sura on a sledge. Senate was the only place in the district with a warm room and a copper. Sura took them. Of course she took them. And 10 days later it was in Senate, and it was in the school, and 2 of our children had it, and one of them was Fun. Fun was 13. She rode the West Road on Nettle. She was Bells and had been Bells since the year the granary burned and her mother died, and she was the first child in the Ash Marches to learn to read a mirror. She died on the 4th of the month in the 2nd room of the herd house, in the room Sura had built after Hala for exactly that purpose. And Sura was with her and so was Bell and so was Poppy, and I was not, because I was 3 days away at Ferry Bank arguing with a factor about 16 pounds of freight. I got back and May met me at the ford and told me before I could get off the cart, because May does not believe in working up to anything, and has never once been wrong about that. 4 died in Senate. 9 in Cinderholm. 6 at Long Meg. And then the marches turned on the herd house. I did not see that coming and I should have. It went round the district in about a fortnight that the fever had come out of Senate, and that it had come out of the room where the elf woman boils things, and that people who went in there came out worse, and by the spring there were 3 villages that would not send us their hurt and 1 man at Merriford Market who spat on our cart. Sura stopped eating. She did not stop working, she stopped eating, which is what she does, and Ilda moved into the herd house for a month and stood over her with a bowl twice a day like a jailer. And the hearthstone went cold. All winter. Not one draw between the first frost and the thaw, because there was not a single house in Senate where anybody slept easy, and a cold stone is what a frightened village looks like from outside it. That was the winter I understood the actual shape of the thing I had been given. It does not pay you for being good. It does not pay you for being clever. It pays you for one thing only, which is whether people in your reach are afraid, and in the winter of the fever every single person in my reach was afraid, and I sat on that cold stone in the dark night after night with my hand on the ring like a fool at a locked door. Wilder came out on the first mild night in the 3rd month, on a stick, in 3 coats, and lowered himself onto the stone next to me with a great deal of care and swearing. Anything? Nothing since the frost. He put his own hand flat on the ring. Nothing happened. He left it there a while. Then he said, without any particular weight, the sentence that took the floor out from under me. Good. I asked him what he meant, and he did not answer, and I asked him again, and he changed the subject to the gudgeon on the mill, and I let him, because he had a hole through him and it was cold. It was another 4 months before I found out what he meant, and by then it was too late to do anything about it, which I have since decided was the entire point. What turned the winter was a 6-year-old girl called Nell Vosk falling into the Draymore mill race. Nell is Rook's daughter. That is the whole weight of it, and I am not going to dress it up. The man Cass killed on our ramp had a wife called Auntie Kroll and a daughter who was 3 when he died, and by that spring she was 6, and she went into the race above the wheel on a wet morning and came out below it with her leg open to the bone. Draymore has a herb woman. She did what a herb woman does. She bounded with a poultice of comfrey and clay and told them to keep the child warm, and on the 4th day the leg was the color of a plum to the knee and Nell had stopped knowing anybody. Halder Vosk carried her across Ox Cross at 2 in the morning on foot. He could have sent a man. He could have sent a cart. He walked into the river at night with a child in his arms and came up our bank and stood outside the herd house and did not knock, because he could not make himself knock, and Surah opened the door because Surah sleeps in that building and hears everything. Can you do anything? I do not know. Put her on the table. He put her on the table and then he stood in the corner of the room for the next 19 hours and did not sit down once. Surah opened that leg and washed it out and cut away what was dead and washed it again, 4 times, over 3 days, with boiled water and honey and a cloth that had been in the copper. And on the 4th morning the color began to come back down the calf, and on the 9th day Nell asked for something to eat. The leg is short now. She limps. She is 9 and she runs anyway, and she is in our school, and Belle says she is the fastest reader in the room, and last summer she rode a pony called Barrow on the long Meg run with a wren badge on her coat and a limp she does not appear to have noticed. Halder Vosk came out of the herd house on the 3rd morning and found me on the green, because I had been standing about outside it like an idiot for 2 days. What do I owe? Nothing. Do not do that. Do not be gracious at me. I have buried a son. I would rather be charged. She does not charge anybody. That is not for you. It has never been for anybody. He looked at the green for a while. The school was making its usual noise. The forge was going. 2 Draymore women were coming out of our shop with salt. Then he put the question that ended the war between our villages, and he put it flatly, the way a man puts the price of grain. What do you actually want? The mill trade back is what you think I want. It is not. What I want is for your 40 men who stayed home to stop being your 40 men. I want your women in my shop, which they already are. I want your children in my school. I want your hurt in that building. And I want the ford at Ox Cross open to my carts at the same fee you charge anybody, and I will pay it, and I will pay it forever. And what do I get? You get to stop being the man who has to hold 900 people together with a stick. He did not answer that. He went home. 9 days later a cart came over Bell Rock from Draymore with 2 of his men on it and a load of good oak that we had not asked for and had not paid for, and there was no message with it, and there did not need to be. The story of that night went round the ash marches faster than anything we ever put on a pony. It went round in exactly the form you would expect, which is that Halder Vosk carried Rook's girl over the water to the woman whose village killed him, and the elf boiled her leg and gave her back walking. 3 villages that would not send us their hurt in the winter were sending it by midsummer. The man who spat on our cart at Marrowford Market came up in the autumn with his wife's hand wrapped in a shirt, and Surah did it and did not mention the spit, and neither did I, and I wanted to, and Greta stood on my foot. That is the thing about the herd house that I did not understand for 3 years. The Whistler bought us one morning. Surah bought us the district. The hearth started paying again in the 4th month. It paid for Nell, which I did not expect at all, because Nell slept 9 nights in a bed in Senate and stopped being afraid in it, and that is all it has ever measured. That was also the spring illness, and I stopped being ridiculous, and I am going to tell it short, because it is mine. She came up to the west shoulder where I had gone to be alone about something stupid, and sat down in the heather, and put it to me. How long do you intend to go on with this? With what? With being married to 67 women and courting none of them. May has a book. There is money on it. Tessa says summer, Poppy says never, Greta says she does not care as long as it does not affect the shop. I told her that the paper was a legal instrument and it would be a filthy thing to lean on. And she said, yes, and I have been standing here for 2 years waiting for you to notice that I signed mine first, on purpose, in front of everybody, and that I have never once let you buy me a thing, and that there is a whole village currently pretending to weed a field 40 yards downhill. I looked. There was. So I asked her, badly, and she said yes before I finished it, and then she said, and I want a proper one, in front of everybody, with May reading it and the cakes, and I want the wording to be different from the wording on the paper. We did it at midsummer. Belle wrote new words. May read them and cried and denied crying. Corvinash cried again, on schedule. Wilder stood at the back with his arms folded and a look on his face that I did not understand until much later, when I knew what he had at home and had been away from for 3 years. Poppy fired the whistler with a blank charge at the end of it and knocked 4 slates off the school roof, and had to pay for them out of her wage, and has never once expressed regret. And it was the best day of my life and it lasted about a week, and then the Baroness Ivymar sold us. She did it exactly the way she said she would, 3 years earlier, in a room with 3 windows, and I had been warned in advance by the person doing it, and I still did not see it coming, which is my whole character in a sentence. Her husband's debt came due in a lump. The bridge at Merriford needed rebuilding after the spring water and the Crown would not pay for it. And Orenfell walked into that room with the money. What he bought was not our land. He bought her paper. The Ford license, the works license, the lease on the mill and the shop and the granary, all of which stood in Ivymar's name because Greta had put them there to keep them out of Ossienpell's hands, and every one of which was hers to sell. He paid 4,000 and some. She cleared her debt and rebuilt her bridge. Her son Denimar rode up to tell us himself, which I have always thought took something, because he was 20 and had to sit on our green and read it out and then eat a meal with us afterwards. He apologized several times. May fed him twice, and by the end of it he was sitting in her doorway asking her how the ovens drew and taking notes. Then the letter came from Orenfell, and it was 2 lines long and perfectly courteous, and it said that the new fees at the Bell Rock crossing would be posted at Merriford on the 2nd day of the month, and that he looked forward to a long and profitable arrangement. The fees, when they were posted, were 1/6 of everything that crossed. 6 times what Mar had charged. Payable to the holder of the license. Greta worked it out in an evening and put the paper in front of me, and it was very simple. At 1/6, our charcoal reaches Merriford at 9.5, and the guild sells at 9, and that is the end of Senate as a trading village in about 14 months. He had put his thumb over the neck of the bottle exactly as he told me he would. We had 4 bad weeks. I want to record what people actually said, because the good idea did not come from me and the story usually gives it to me. Corvin wanted to break the license by breaking the ford and building a new one 2 miles up, and Greta showed him the wording, which covered any crossing on the Colt between the 2 bridges, and Corvin put his head on the forge bench. Cass wanted to stop paying and see what he did about it. Poppy agreed with Cass, loudly, and Poppy was told to be quiet by 4 people at once. Hob Taro said we should put everything on the river and forget the road, and Greta showed him the sum on that too, because the river runs southeast and Coldwater is northwest, and the mine is 1/3 of our money now. And Wren came down from Coldwater. That is what nobody ever believes, and I did not believe it either until she was standing in the doorway with the Moor still on her boots. She came down the Moor Road in the 4th week with a letter from Nessa Bird, and she came into the longhouse where 20 of us were arguing, and she stood in the door until it went quiet, and then she said the thing that broke the whole problem open. Nessa says he has come to her too. He has bought the hauling contract on the Coldwater Road. He will have her at 1/6 by the winter. She wants to know what you are going to do, and she says that if the answer is nothing, she is going to sell him her powder works, because she is 60 and tired. And then Wren looked at her sister and said, and before anybody says anything, I know. I know what I did. I am not asking to come back. I am asking what you are going to do. I did not sleep that night and neither did Greta, and at about 4 in the morning I went and got Wilder out of bed, because Wilder had spent 20 years in an army and I wanted somebody who had lost things. I put it to him in one sentence. A man has bought every road we can use and I cannot buy them back and I cannot fight him. Wilder sat on the edge of the bed with his shoulders stiff and thought about it for a long time. What is he selling? Charcoal, freight, and now powder. He will have the only powder in 3 districts by spring. And what is he actually selling? I did not follow, and I said so, and he tried again, and this is how he put it, and it is the single most useful thing anybody has said to me in my life. He is selling the fact that there are only 2 of you. Every price he sets works because a buyer at Marrowford has a choice of 2 doors, and he owns one and can squeeze the other. He is in the business of there being exactly 2 of you. So what happens if there are 40? Wilder shrugged with one shoulder, which was all he had. Then he is a man with a road license and no leverage, and he goes back to being a merchant, which is what he actually is. We did it in 9 weeks and it was the largest thing I have ever organized, and it cost us every friend we had at Marrowford for about a year. We gave it away. All of it. Bell and Wren wrote it out. Not a hint, not a formula for the initiated. A sheet, drawn in pictures because half the marches cannot read, showing the pit, the layers, the turning, the leaching, the boiling, the mixing wet, the pressing, the corning, the grain sizes, and at the bottom, in Bell's careful hand and in Wren's, the ratio. We printed 40 of them off wood blocks Corvin cut. We sent them with the Wrens. Cinderholm, Longmag, Kettle Hill, Ferry Bank, Stowe, 3 villages on the lower water, the Smiths at Marrowford, the quarry at Grey Ing, and Coldwater, which already had it, and got a copy anyway, and Nessa Bird wrote back one line asking whether I had lost my mind. What came back was better than anything we had planned, because a sheet of pictures travels further than a cart. A woman called Dilla Orm at a place called Ashett dug her first bed behind a pigsty and had crystal in 14 months and has sold us every ounce since. A man named Robson Nick at Pennock got it wrong twice and blew the end off his own barn and came to Surrey with his eyebrows gone and would not stop laughing. A widow at Cold Barrow that everybody calls Mother Vance turned 4 beds with a hoe at the age of 68 and outsold 3 villages. Did you not worry, people ask me, that somebody would use it on you? Every single day. And then Kit Warrow at Grey Ing used his first £40 to take the top off a face that had killed 9 men in a morning, and a carter called Wilby Sarn used his to clear a rock out of the Sump Lane channel that had been there since before his father. And in 4 years exactly 1 man in this district has ever pointed powder at another man, and he was drunk, and 9 took it off him. And with each sheet went a second sheet, which was Greta's, and which was the actual weapon. The second sheet said that Senate would buy saltpetre. Any quantity. At a fixed price. Delivered to Bell Rock or to any hut on the Coldwater Road, paid on the day, no haggling, forever. Because here is what I had understood at about 4 in the morning with Wilder sitting on a bed. The hard work in powder is not the mixing. It is 18 months of a stinking pit and somebody turning it every fortnight. Any village can do that. No village wants to do only that. So we stopped being the people who make powder and became the people who buy the one ingredient nobody else wants to be stuck with. 40 villages dug niter beds behind their goat pens. We bought the crystal off all of them at a price they could count on, and we ground and pressed and corned it at Senate with Wren's crew. And we sold it at a price that Orrin Fell could not follow us down to, because he had to pay carters and we had to pay a woman in Long Meg for a bucket. And the price of powder in the ash marches fell by 2/3 in a year, and every quarry and every mine and every farmer with a stump problem started buying it. And the trade got about 15 times bigger, and we held about 1/3 of a thing that was 15 times bigger. The Tallow Guild does not sell powder anymore. It has not sold a single pound of it since the second winter after those sheets went out on the ponies. It sells rope, tallow, salt, and freight, and it does all of those things perfectly well, and Orrin Fell still owns the license on our Ford and we still pay him 1/6 on everything that crosses it, and he has never once reduced it, and he sends a card at midwinter. I met him in Marrowford about a year after, in the yard at the Saltgate, and he stopped and looked at me and said the only unpleasant thing he ever said to me, and he said it with real feeling. You could have been rich. You have made an entire district slightly less poor. Nobody will remember which one of us did that. Probably not. And then he laughed and said he would see me in the spring, and he did, and he bought 4 tons of our charcoal at 8, because by then it was cheaper for him to buy it than to burn it. Nessa Bird came to Senate that winter for the fair. The fair was maize, of course. She had been saying for 2 years that a place with a mill and a shop and a ford ought to have one day in the year when everybody comes, and we held the first one on the shortest day, and about 400 people came, and by the 3rd year it was 1,500 and there were people sleeping in the charcoal sheds. What is a fair, if you have never had one? It is a bakehouse working 4 days. It is Auntie E. Kroll from Draymore selling cheese 2 stalls down from the woman whose village killed her husband. It is Ossie Bream the tinker, and a man from Stowe with a bear that turned out to be a very large dog, and a fiddler called Gorse who is paid in mead and has never once been sober by dark. It is a horse fair in the mill field, run by Dilly Knock, who takes a copper on every sale and gives it all to the school. It is Surrey on a stool by the hurt house door with a queue, because people save their hurts for fair day, which she has begged them for 6 years not to do. It is Poppy firing the whistler at noon with a blank charge, and every child in the march is waiting for it, and 3 people every year forgetting and dropping something. And it is the eating contest, which may invented in the second year for reasons nobody has ever established, and which has been won 5 times running by a small woman from Kettle Hill called Nantilly, and once, disastrously, by Corvin Ash. Nessa Bird walked round it for a whole afternoon with her hands behind her back, and at the end she found me by the Whistler, which Poppy had polished and set up on the green with a rope round it like a monument, and put one question to me. Why did you not sell it to me when I asked? Because I did not understand what it was for. And now I would give it to you, and I did, and you have a works and I have a works and neither of us can be squeezed by a man with a road. Take a cake. My mother-in-law made 400 of them and she is watching us. May is not my mother-in-law and never was, and she heard me say it from 30 feet away, and she has never let me take it back. So that was the 4th year. 92 households. A mill, 2 forges, a shop with a glass window, a school with 41 children in it and 2 teachers, a herd house with 6 beds and 3 girls training, 4 huts on the Coldwater Road, 3 mirrors, 9 wrens, a river landing, and a district that had stopped being poor in the specific way it had been poor for 100 years. And I had not opened the gate once in 4 years. Not once. Not since the mud in the granary yard. I had never needed to and I had never wanted to when I had a village to run, and the truth is I had half forgotten I was a summoner at all, which is why it took me 4 years to notice what was happening to the door. It came out of a kindness. Wilder's daughter June had a birthday in the 4th month. He never mentioned it. Sura mentioned it, because Sura had sat with him through 2 fever nights and had heard a great deal he did not know he had said. So I got the idea that I would put a letter through. It is not a stupid idea. A gate is a hole. Things had come through it in one direction for 4 years. I had never once tried to push anything the other way, and the only reason I had never tried is that nobody had thought of anything worth sending. Bell wrote it out because his hand was still bad on that side, and it took him 4 days to say what he wanted to say and about 9 lines to say it, and I have never read it and never will. We did it on the green in the evening with about 30 people watching because there is no such thing as a private anything in Senate. I put my hand on the ring and I opened the gate. And what opened was about the size of my fist. I want you to understand what I was looking at. For years earlier, in a granary yard, in the mud, in a temper, with no chalk and no preparation and no idea what I was doing, I had opened a hole in the world the size of a door and a grown man had walked through it carrying a pack. Now, on the stone, with everything I knew, standing still, ready, 4 years of practice at everything else in my life, I got a hole I could not have got my arm through. There was snow on the other side of it. There is always snow. He says it is the same road and I believe him. I put the letter through and it went, and the gate shut, and I sat down on the grass. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Poppy, who is 19 and has no instinct for silence whatsoever, put the question everybody else was too kind to put. It used to be bigger, did it not? Sura measured the ring on the stone that night. Then she went and got Belle, and Belle had drawn the ring on a board in the first spring, because Belle draws everything, and she brought the board out and laid it on the granite. The ring on the board was the size of a dinner plate. The ring on the stone was the size of a saucer. I sat up until about 3 in the morning and did the only arithmetic that mattered and it came out the same however I turned it. Something like 400 draws in 4 years. A ring that had lost more than half its width. And a gate that had gone from a door to a fist. And I remembered a man sitting on a cold stone in the worst winter of my life with his hand flat on the ring, saying, "Good." I went and got him out of bed for the second time. He came out and stood on the green in the dark in his coat and he did not pretend for 1 second, which I will always be grateful for, because I think if he had pretended I would have hit him. How long have you known? About a month. Maybe 6 weeks. A month. The first month. Not this year. The first month I was here. I could not say anything at all for a while, and he let me not say anything, and when I finally got a sentence out it was not the one I meant to say. Why did you keep turning the beds? Because they needed turning. Do not do that. Answer me. He sat down on the stone. The night you put the roof on the long house, he said, I felt it go. I was asleep and it went through me like a door shutting somewhere in a house. And in the morning there was a round of ammunition on this rock. And I am not a stupid man, and I could count, and by the end of the first month I knew exactly what the trade was, and I have known every single day since. 400 draws. Nearer 5. I stopped counting in the second year because it was not helping me. And you let me. I did more than let you. You wanted to build a second forge in the 3rd year and I told you to build it and I told you where. I have been standing at your shoulder for 4 years telling you to build things. Why? And this is what I have gone over more times than any other single minute of my life, because he did not answer it the way a man in a story answers it. He said, because I looked at the alternative. Then he said, do you want the honest version or the version that makes me look good? The honest one. The honest one is that in the first month I could probably have made you stop. I could have told you, on that first morning, and you would have stopped, because you were 22 and you would have done what I said. And I stood in the longhouse that morning and I looked at 86 women who were going to get taken apart one at a time over about 6 years by a man with 900 people, and I thought about walking home through a door and leaving them to it. And I could not make my legs do it. And that was 500 draws ago. That was one. Every single one after it was easier. That is how it works. Nobody ever spends the last one. They spend the first one and then they do not notice the rest. Then he put it to me that the village should not know. I put it to the village the next morning. That is the only order he ever gave me that I broke, and I broke it in front of him, from the hearthstone, with the whole green there, and I told it straight, and it took about 4 minutes. The gate is closing. Every time this stone has paid us, it has closed a little. There are somewhere between 4 and 500 of those. He has known since the first month. He knew when he was turning the nighter. He knew when we were laughing at the pink bird. He knew at my wedding. And then I said the thing I had spent the night getting to. So from today, nothing new goes up in this village. There was a silence and then there was uproar, and the uproar lasted 10 days, and I lost. I want to be honest about how I lost, because I have heard it told as though I made a noble decision, and I did not. I was outvoted by a bakehouse. May started it. She stood up in the longhouse on the second night and put one question to me. How many does he need? I do not know. I have never opened it more than a fist and I do not know what it costs to open it wide. Then you do not know what you are saving, said May, and you are asking 90 households to stop building on a number you have not got. Find the number. Greta backed her, which I had not expected. Ren backed her. Sura did not, and Sura and Ilna and I were the whole of the losing side. And we lost 60 to 31. So we did not stop. We slowed. We stopped taking a draw for anything we could do without, and that turned out to be almost nothing, because it does not work like that. The hearth pays for the sleeping and not for the asking, and the only way to refuse it is to stop making people safe. We managed about a third. It bought us maybe a year. I have never worked out whether it was worth it. And I spent that year trying to find the number, and I found it in the end, and I found it by doing the one thing I had not done since I was 22, which was open my own book of notes and read Farron Dask's handwriting 11 times in the margins, the word no. But there was a 12th thing in there, on the last page, that was not no. It was a line in his hand under my drawing of the ring. See Valerie on Reciprocal Apertures, 3rd book, where the fool argues a gate may be opened wholly from the near side at the cost of its whole store charge. See also the 400 years in which nobody has repeated him. I had read that 100 times when I was 19 and it had meant nothing to me because I had nothing stored in anything. Now I had a stone with 4 years of a village in it. I sat in the longhouse with that page in front of me for 2 days. Then I got Belle and Greta and Sura and Ilna and Wilder and I put it on the table. Here is what I think it is. The stone is a battery, and every roof and every wedding and every child who stopped being frightened has been charging it, and every single thing that has come out of it has been spent out of the charge. And there is a way to spend the whole thing at once. Which does what? Which opens it wide. Once. Wide enough for a man and a pack. And then? And then it is an ordinary stone in the middle of a green. Nobody said anything for a bit. Then Ilna put the only question that mattered, looking at Wilder and not at me. And how much charge is in it now? Not enough. Not nearly. On my arithmetic we would need about 4 times what is in there, and we have been spending it faster than we make it for 4 years, and even if we stopped dead today and built nothing and took nothing, at the rate this village grows, it would be about 9 years. Wilder did the sum himself, out loud, in his own language first and then in ours, the way he had counted the brass on that first night. June will be 16. That was the 5th spring. And that was when the Summoners College finally noticed us, and I have to explain how, because it is the stupidest reason in this entire account and it is entirely my fault. Greta had been selling hearth things in the shop for 4 years, not the useful ones. We kept those. But there is a great deal that comes out of a hole in the world that is of no earthly use to anybody in the ash marches, and Greta has never in her life let a thing sit on a shelf when somebody would pay for it. We sold a smooth white cup with a picture of a cat on it to a corn factor from Stowe. We sold the folding tool with the 7 blades, eventually, for a shocking amount of money, to a surgeon at Ferry Bank. We sold a pair of dark glass spectacles to a lady off a barge, and a black comb, and a bag of small colored shapes that Wilder said were for building toy houses, and 7 of those little brass cylinders that will never fit anything, which sell better than any of it because people think they are amulets. And somewhere in the 4th year, one of those things went down the river to Ferry Bank, and from Ferry Bank to Sar, and from Sar into the hands of a man who buys curiosities for the College of Summoners at Halloway. Farron Dask spent 2 years buying them back up the chain. He came in the 5th spring, alone, on a grey horse, with no escort and no staff and 1 saddlebag, and he rode up the Tallow Road and over Bell Rock like a man on a walking holiday. And he paid the 6th on his horse at the ford like everybody else, and he sat down on the bench outside the shop and waited to be noticed. I came out and he stood up and he had not changed at all. Small, neat, grey beard, the voice that never has to get louder. Hello, boy. We walked round the village for 2 hours. I did not offer and he did not ask. He simply set off and I went with him because there was nothing else to do, and he looked at everything. He stood in the doorway of the school for a long time. He looked at the mill wheel from the bottom and then from the top. He put his hand on the whistler. He asked Corvin Ash 3 questions about hoop welding that Corvin was still talking about a month later. He went into the hurt house and did not go past the door, and he watched Sura take a splinter out of a cinder home child's foot, and then he asked her, quite gently, where she had learned to boil the instrument, and Sura told him a man had told her to, and he nodded and went out. And at the end of it he sat down on the hearthstone, exactly where Oshin Pell had sat and exactly where Halder Vosk had not, and he took a thing out of his saddlebag and put it on the granite. It was a fork. A cheap, bent, 4-pronged fork with a green handle. 26 of these. That is what I have bought in 2 years. Cups. Wire. A shoe with no buckle and no seam and no stitching, made of a substance I cannot name. A flat card with a picture on it that is not painted and is not printed and has more detail in it than any painting in the capital. I did not say anything. None of them exist. I have had 4 of them broken apart by the best glassmen and metalmen in Halloway, and the verdict every time is that they cannot be made, and they are sitting on my desk. And every single one of them was sold, over a counter, by a woman in an apron, in a village at the end of a road, and I have been standing all afternoon in the only place in this kingdom where the impossible is a line of stock. Then he looked up. Your gate was not empty, was it? No. Say it properly. It opens into another world. There is no mana in it at all. They have machines instead. It has been open on this stone for 4 years and everything you have bought has come out of it. Farron Dask, who taught summoning at the college for 31 years, and who ruined my life with 2 words on a floor of white sand, sat on a rock in an elf village and put both hands over his face for about a quarter of a minute. Then he took them away and he was perfectly composed, and he made me an offer, and I want to set it down in full because it was a good offer and because I have been made to go through it 100 times. Your name goes back on the roll. Not restored. Never expelled. The record will show a research placement in the Northern Marches, dated from the year you left, and I will sign it myself and I will be laughed at for it and I do not care. Second. The chair of applied summoning is mine to give and I am giving it to you, and you are 27, and the youngest before you was 44. Third. Senate becomes a crown holding, direct, not under Merriford and not under any baron, with its market rights confirmed and its debts to the War Office written off, which I can do with 1 letter because the War Office owes the college more than it owes anybody. Fourth. Your Ford license is bought back from Master Fell at whatever he asks, and given to you. And fifth, said Dask, the stone comes to Halloway. There it is, he agreed. And before you say anything, boy, understand that I have worked out the rule. I have been walking round your village for 2 hours and I have counted your roofs and I have walked to your boundary and put my hand on it. It runs on homes. It runs on people sleeping easy under something you built for them. Yes. Then think, said Farron Dask, and for the first time his voice did get louder, and it was not anger, it was something much worse, it was joy. There are 90 households here. There are 30,000 in Halloway. There are 400,000 in this kingdom. You have run this thing for 4 years on 86 frightened women in a burnt valley, and it has given you a mill and a school and a gun and a man out of another world. Put it in the capital. Put it under the crown. Build houses. Build hospitals like that one, in every ward, in every town. You are not looking at a village. You are looking at the first 4 years of the biggest thing that has happened to this kingdom in 300 years, and you are using it to sell forks. And I sat down on the stone next to him, because my legs had gone, because he was right. That is what nobody wants to hear. He was right. Every word of it was true, and I knew it was true while he was saying it. If that stone had sat in Holloway for those 4 years instead of here, with the crown behind it and 30,000 households in reach, it would have paid 100 times what it paid us. And there would be a hurt house in every ward of that city where they boiled a knife, and Finn would not be the only child in the Ash Marches who ever learned to read a mirror. I sat there and I thought about it honestly for about a minute, which is longer than most people ever give the thing that would have made them a hero. And then I asked him the one question I had, and it was not a clever question, and I did not ask it cleverly. What happens to him? Dask did not follow. The man who came through. He has a wife and a daughter. The only way he goes home is if the stone is charged full and spent all at once, from this side, by me. What happens to him in Holloway? Farron Dask thought about it properly. I will give him that. He did not lie and he did not hurry. In Holloway, he said, that stone will be under the crown, and the crown will not spend 4 years of the charge of the biggest engine in the kingdom to send one foreigner home. Not for him. Not for you. Not for me. I would argue for it and I would lose, and I would go on being the man who found it. Then no. He looked at me for a long moment. You understand that this is a great deal larger than one man? Yes. And you are saying no anyway. I am saying no anyway. Farron Dask stood up and brushed the hearth dust off his robe, exactly the way he had brushed the sand off his knees in front of 200 people on the day he ruined me, and he picked up the bent fork and put it back in his bag. I have to tell them. Do you understand that? I am 63 years old and I have been waiting for this since before your mother was born. I have found the thing I have been looking for since I was your age, and it is sitting in a village at the end of a road with a pink bird on a pole, and I cannot unfind it, and if I go home and say nothing, then in 2 years a corn factor at Stowe says it instead, and it is worse. I know. I am sorry, said Farron Dask, and I have thought for 2 years about whether he meant it, and I have decided that he did. He rode down the Tallow Road at a walk, and 19 days later Sir Aubrey Lance came into Marrowford with a company of the Crown's grey horse, 240 of them, and 2 riders on griffins, and a wagon train, and a writ under the seal of the college and the Crown together for the removal of a hearthstone from the village of Sennet in the northern marches, by consent if consent were given, and otherwise not. Mabencrake brought us the writ himself, on the mule, in the rain, and he had had it for 6 days before he brought it, and he told me so on the green in front of 40 people so that nobody could pretend afterwards that he had not. 6 days is what I had. I am 54 and I have a wife at Stowe, and I am not a brave man, and that is all the bravery I had in me. It is in your hands now and there is nothing else I can do, and I am going to go and sit by the river. Then he asked, on his way to the mule, whether Sura would look at his hand, which had been bad since the winter, and she did, and he stayed 2 days. 6 days is a great deal. We put the mirrors up on the first morning and the wrens went out at noon, and by dusk the whole Ash Marches knew, and this is what came back, including the ones that did not come. Cinderholm came. Orla Quist walked in on the second morning with 61 people and a good many billhooks and her 2 sons and a cart of bread, and she did not make a speech. She went to find Greta. Where do you want the bread? Long Meg came. Tarnquil brought 40 and a barrel of niter we had not paid for yet and would not now be paying for. Kettle Hill came, which is 9 households, and all 9 of them came, which is the kind of arithmetic that stops your throat. Nan Tilly walked in at the front of them with a hay knife on a pole and wanted to know whether there was work in the bakehouse, and there was. And things came that were not people. Grey ING sent 400 weight of stone and 16 quarrymen who knew how to move it. Ferrybank sent nothing, and a man from Ferrybank called Simroud came anyway on his own and would not give a reason. The Ramen Bucket at Stowe sent 9 barrels of beer with a note saying it was sold and would be invoiced later, and no invoice ever arrived. A woman none of us had ever seen walked in from the Kello salt pans with 2 sons and a cart and said her name was Hestadole and that she had heard we took people, and I asked what she meant by took, and she said, took, and stayed, and is still here, and runs the salt store. Coldwater sent Wren with 4 wagons of powder and a letter from Nessa Bird that said, in full, I am 61 and I am not walking 3 days over a moor, and here is what I have, and if you lose I will be very cross. Hob Taro brought the grey hen and the otter up to Bell Rock with his brother-in-law and 18 river men and no idea what he was going to do with them, and it turned out to matter enormously. Dilly Knot did something better than coming. He went to Mariford and spent 4 days in the yard at the Saltgate telling every carter in the district, at length, with drink, that the grey horse had a wagon train and no carters of their own north of the Colt, and that a man who took Crown freight up the Tallow Road that fortnight would be hauling for a company that was going to be in a river by Thursday, and would he like to be remembered for that in a district where he had to live afterwards. Not one Mariford carter took Crown freight that fortnight. Not one. Sir Aubrey Lance came north with 240 horse and 4 days of supply and no way to bring up a fifth. And Ferrybank did not come, and Stowe did not come, and the Smiths at Mariford sent a letter of very warm regard and no man, and the Baroness Ivymar sent nothing at all and made no reply of any kind, and I did not expect one and was not owed one. And Orrin Fell sent a note. It said that as holder of the license on the Bell Rock crossing he wished it recorded that any damage to the crossing during a Crown action was the Crown's to make good, that he had lodged that with the Reeve, and that he would be obliged if we would not do anything permanent to the ramps. Then, at the bottom, in a different hand and clearly added later, it said, keep the mill. Halder Vosk came on the 4th morning. He came over Ox Cross on foot in front of 180 men, which was every man in Draymoor who could carry anything, including the 40 who had stayed home the day he came at us, and including Gart Doom the miller, who was Piper's father, and who had not crossed that river since his son came to work in ours. He stopped at the bottom of the ramp, which is the place where he had stopped 4 years before. I am not doing this for you. I know. You have taken my mill trade, my son is dead on this bank, and half my village buys its salt in your shed. I have thought about it for 6 days and here it is. If the Crown puts a garrison on that stone, they will put it 4 miles from Draymoor, and they will feed it out of Draymoor, and in some years there will not be a Draymoor. I have been the biggest thing in this valley for 22 years and I have been beaten by an elf village with a bakehouse, and I would rather be beaten by you than owned by them. Then he said, and put me somewhere useful, and I put him at Ox Cross with his 180, and that was the whole of the conversation. So on the 5th night there were about 640 people inside the reach of the Senate stone who did not live there. They slept in the charcoal sheds, in the mill loft, in the school, in every hut on the Coldwater Road, in the way houses, in the wool shed, under carts, in the long house, and May baked for 19 hours and Bell had the children moving straw all night and Poppy had a list. And the stone paid. It paid 14 times in that one night, and 19 the night after, and about 70 in the 6 days, and it went on paying for a fortnight afterwards. And nobody had planned it, and I want to be very clear about that, because people say now that I built the whole thing to do that on purpose and I did not. I was thinking about billhooks. It was Sura who saw it. She came and found me at about 2 in the morning on the 5th night in the middle of everything and pulled me out of a conversation and took me to the stone and made me look. The ring was wider. Not by much. By the width of a thumb, maybe. But 4 years of that ring going in one direction and I knew the edge of it better than I knew my own hand. 600 people. 600 people who have been frightened of something for 4 days, lying down under our roofs, and going to sleep. I did not sleep at all that night, and neither did she, and at about 4 we got Bell out of the school and did the arithmetic 3 times on the slate floor with chalk. If it held. If they came and we won and the district stayed. If every one of those 600 slept easy here, and then went home and slept easy there because the thing that frightened them was gone. Then it was not 9 years. It was one night, and I could not tell anybody, because it was arithmetic done at 4 in the morning by 3 frightened people on a floor, and because 240 of the Crown's grey horse were 19 miles away, and because if I was wrong I was going to be wrong in front of a man who had turned a dung heap with a fork for 18 months without complaining. I told Ilna at dawn. She listened all the way to the end. Then she said, do not tell him. Why? Because if he knows, he will spend the whole thing being careful. And you need him to be exactly what he is for 4 more days. The grey horse came into the valley on the 7th morning and they came properly, and I had never seen a Real army do anything before and I have not since. They did not come up the Tallow Road in a column. They came in 3 parts, a screen out front at a walk, the main body a mile back, and the wagons a mile behind that, and they put the 2 griffins up at first light and kept them up. Sir Aubrey Lance rode forward at about 9 with 4 men and a white cloth on a lance and stopped at 80 paces from the bottom of our ramp, and I walked down to meet him with Greta on one side and nobody on the other. He had not changed either. That is the thing about people who ruin your life. You expect them to have aged. He read the writ out. It took a while. He read it well. Then he folded it and looked at me and said, entirely without malice, which was somehow worse, that he had been told I would be difficult and that he could not for the life of him see what there was here to be difficult about. It is a rock. It is a rock in a green in a village. The crown is not taking your mill, or your ford, or your school. We will pay for the rock. We will pay 400 silver for the rock. And I have 240 horse behind me and you have farmers. Come and take it, then. And he actually laughed, and he said, that is what I said you would say, and Archmagistask said you would not, and I have won 2 silver off a man of 63, which is a poor way to make money. Then he leaned forward on the saddle bow and said the thing that told me exactly how this was going to go. I know what is on that hill. I have read the reports for 4 years. Thunder on a clear day, a hole through a hat at 400 paces. And I want you to understand what happens if it fires. If one man of mine goes down to a thing that cannot be explained, then this stops being a rock and becomes a matter of state, and then it is not 240 horse in the spring, it is the whole northern army in the autumn, and there will not be a village here at all. Whereas if all you have is farmers, well, then it is farmers, and I go home, and somebody writes a letter. So he had worked it out. That is the thing nobody understands about that week. Aubrey Lance was not a fool and he was not a brute. He put his boot on my head at 19 because it was free, and he came up that road at 32 with a very clear head, and he told me the true shape of the thing in about 40 words while sitting on a horse. I went back up the ramp and got everybody who mattered into the mill and I put it to them exactly as he had put it to me. If Wilder fires, we win the morning and lose the valley. Cass wanted to fight it. Corvin wanted to fight it. Poppy wanted to fight it very loudly. And Wilder sat on a sack of flour at the back with the case across his knees and did not say a word for a quarter of an hour, and then he said one thing. He is right, and it is worse than he said. How? Because I am one man with 34 rounds, said Wilder, and there are 240 of them, and they are not standing in a river being stupid. They are a real unit with a real officer and they will find me by the second day. I can kill about 9 people and then I will be a strange man in a strange country with a heavy stick and they will have every reason in the world to burn this place to the ground to get at me. So it stays shut. It stays shut, said Wilder, and he put the case on the floor of the mill and pushed it under the meal chest with his boot, and that is where it stayed for 5 days. And then he stood up and asked for a stick and a flat piece of ground, and for the next 4 hours he taught 900 people how to fight without him, which is what he had actually been doing for 4 years without any of us noticing. The ground. 4 years of quarrying above Bell Rock. Spoil heaps, old faces, the dry mill leat, 4 pits and a bank. Horses cannot work in it. Nobody had ever built it as a defense. We had built it by digging up slate for 1,200 yards of school floor in 2 mills and a shop. The Whistler, and its younger sister, which Corbin had finished in the winter and which Poppy had named the Kettle because it is short and fat. 14 canisters of scrap between them, 400 pounds of black powder, which is the largest quantity assembled in one place in the history of the northern marches, and which came from 40 niter beds behind 40 goat pens in 8 villages, 960 people, of whom about 600 could swing something. 2 boats. 3 mirrors, 19 ponies, and a bell. And Draymore at Ox Cross. The Griffins came over at about 9 that first morning and that is where it started, and the Griffins were the thing I had no answer for at all. And the answer came from a 19-year-old with a mirror and a grudge. They fly high and they come down fast and there is nothing you can do to them with a bow. Their riders were a man called Falk and a woman called Sear, and they were not there to fight, they were there to look, because Lance did not have a map of our workings and we did. Poppy took the Kettle Hill mirror off its post, carried it up onto the school roof, and waited. She had spent 4 years signaling with that mirror. She knew exactly where the sun was going to be at every hour of the day because that is the entire skill. And when Falk came down the second time to look at the mill leat, she put the whole face of it on him from 90 yards below and held it there. He did not fall. It is not that dramatic. What happened is that the griffin turned away from it, because a griffin is an animal, and it turned away twice more. And after that Falk could not get within 200 feet of anything Poppy did not want him to see, and by the afternoon there were 4 mirrors doing it and a rota, and half of them were children. Sear was cleverer. She came in low up the river at dusk on the second day where the light was behind her, and she came right over the ramp at about 60 feet, and Corbin Ash put a canister of scrap up at her from the Whistler at almost exactly the wrong angle, and it should not have worked and it did. The Griffin came down in the shallows below the ford. Sear came off it and broke a leg and was in Surra's herd house within the hour, and stayed there 30 days, and Sura took the leg apart and set it and Seer walked out on it. The only enemy who came inside our walls in that entire week came in on a stretcher, and the whole village fed her. And Ser Aubrey Lance lost his eyes in the sky on the second day and never got them back, and after that he was a man with 240 horse in a valley he could not see, and everything that happened afterwards came out of that. He tried Ox Cross on the third morning, because Ox Cross is the real ford and always has been, and it is wide and hard-bottomed and a horse can cross it 4 abreast, and there is nothing on the Draymore side but a village street. Halder Vosk had 2 days and 180 men and every cart in Draymore. They did not build a wall. Vosk is 62 and knows exactly what a wall is worth. What they did was take the doors off every house on the 2 streets that come down to the water, and the shutters, and the byre gates, and they nailed them across the mouths of the alleys. And then they took up the paving of the ford road for 60 yards and dug it into a bog with the mill leat, and then 180 people stood behind the doors with billooks and waited. The grey horse came into that at a trotted 9 in the morning and were out of it by 1:30, and Lance lost 9 horses and no men, which tells you he pulled them out fast and properly, and it also tells you that Halder Vosk had told his people to hit horses. That was the old man's arithmetic and it was better than mine. Kill a crown trooper and you have a murder. Kill his horse and you have a man walking home. After that Lance came back to Bell Rock, because there was nowhere else to go. The 4th day was the bad one. He came at the ramp on foot with about 160 dismounted troopers at 4 in the afternoon with the sun behind him, and it lasted 2 hours, and they very nearly had it. The pits worked once. The bank worked twice. The Whistler and the Kettle fired several times between them and killed 4 men and broke about 20. And after the 6th shot the Kettle would not take another charge because Corvin had made her too light and she was walking backwards on her bed with every round. They came up the spoil at the north end, which is the one line Wilder had said they would not use because it is loose slate and you cannot run on it. And they did not run on it, they came up it slowly and in good order with shields on their backs, and that is where I found out the difference between people who have done this and people who have not. Cass held the top of the spoil with 30 billhooks and Orla Quist's sons and 18 of Hob Taro's rivermen, and they held it for about a quarter of an hour and then they did not, and it went over the top and into the works, and for about 10 minutes there was fighting inside our quarry. Tib was killed. He was 15. He had learned to read at 11 so that he could ride a pony and he had ridden the long Meg run for 4 years and he had no business being anywhere near the spoil and had got there by exactly the route you would expect. Corvinash took a sword across the forearm and kept the Whistler firing with one hand and Poppy loading. And Cass got them off the top by doing the single most reckless thing anybody did in that week, which was to roll 2 barrels of powder down into the gully with a slow match and take 4 of our own people with them. And it did not kill anybody on either side and it filled the whole north spoil with smoke and rock dust and it broke their line, and they went back down. We had the ramp at dusk. We had lost the north spoil and taken it back and it had cost us Tib and a woman from Cinderholm called Kell and a few wounded. And Sura had the hurt house full and 2 more rooms of the school full, and she had crown troopers on the floor next to Cinderholm farmers and would not have it any other way. Who was in that school room? I have never written it down before and I am going to now, because names are the only thing anybody actually keeps. Marlquist with a broken jaw. Wick Tilly with his hand opened. A quarryman off Grey Ing called Dolt Ferrers who lost 2 fingers to his own bar. Simraud from Ferry Bank, who had come on his own and would not give a reason, with a spear wound in the thigh. 2 of Hob Taro's river men, Prue and a boy they only ever called Sprat. And 4 of the Grey Horse. A trooper called Hallam with a smashed knee. Another called Des who was 19. A sergeant named Culver who would not give his name for a day and a half and then gave it because Bell asked him what to write on the bull. And Seer, the Griffin rider, on the far bench with her leg splinted, translating for the other 3, because none of them would speak to us at first and she had been there 8 days and had decided we were not going to eat anybody. Are you going to hang us? That was Des, on the second night, to Bell, who was carrying a lamp. And Bell put the lamp down on the floor beside him and gave him the only answer anybody ever gave a crown trooper in that building. We are going to feed you, and then you are going to go home, and I would like you to eat this while it is hot. I stood at the top of the ramp in the dark and understood that we could not do that again on the 5th day. And that is when I blew the ford. I want to be exact about what that was, because it has been told as a clever trick and it was not clever and it was not a trick. Bell Rock Ford was 2 ramps of packed clay faced with river stone, built by 86 women and 11 children over 26 days in the first year, carried across in baskets on their heads. And Bell's children had laid the small stones because small hands pack a face better, and Rue had worked on it, and Halla had worked on it, and Rookvosk had died on it, and every single thing that Senet had become had crossed it. We put 90 pounds of powder under the far ramp in 3 charges in the dark, and Wren laid the fuse because Wren has the best hands in the village, and at about 2 in the morning I lit it myself, because it was mine delight. The far ramp went into the river. So did about 40 feet of the far bank. The colt backed up for an hour and then found its way round and took the rest of it, and by dawn there was no crossing at Bell Rock at all, and there has not been one since. Ilda stood next to me on our side and watched it go, and she did not say anything for a long time, and then she said, 400 baskets. I know. I carried about 400 baskets. My hands went the color of the clay. I know. Do it again if you have to, she said, and went to see to the wounded. At dawn Sir Aubrey Lance had 230 horse, no way over the river at Bell Rock, a bog and 180 billhooks at Ox Cross, no eyes in the air, 4 days of supply going into its 7th day, no carters, a herd house full of his own men on the wrong side of a river, and a valley behind him where every hut on every road had people in it who had walked in from somewhere else. He did the correct thing, which was to try the one route nobody had thought about, and he very nearly finished us with it. The mill leat. We had cut it in the 2nd year to run water to the mill wheel from a weir a mile upstream, and then we had cut a 2nd one when the first proved too shallow, and the first one had been dry for 3 years and was overgrown to the top and ran from the river bank straight into the middle of the village, coming out behind the school. He put 60 men into it at 3 in the morning on the 6th day. They came up it in the dark on their hands and knees for the better part of a mile, and they came out behind the school, inside everything, 40 yards from the hearthstone, and there was nobody at all in front of them but Bell, who was sleeping in the school because there were 9 wounded in it. What stopped them was Scrap, Corvin Ash's brother's dog. 11 years old, deaf on one side, sleeps in the school because Bell feeds him. He went off in the dark and Bell came out with a lamp and started screaming, and Bell has a voice that has controlled 40 children for 6 years. And then it was the whole village in the dark in their shirts, and there was no order to any of it, and it went on for about 20 minutes, and it was the worst thing I have ever been in. Sir Aubrey Lance came out of that leat 3rd from the front. I know that because Piper Doone told me afterwards, and Piper Doone was there because the leat comes out beside the mill and Piper Doone sleeps in the mill, because he has slept in the mill every night for 4 years, because that is what the village decided to do with him instead of hanging him. He came out of the mill door with a barrel hook. I have asked him twice what he was thinking, and both times he has said he was not thinking anything, and I believe him. He got the hook into Lance's harness at the shoulder from behind and put him into the leat and knelt on him, and he was still kneeling on him when 4 of Hob Taro's river men got there with poles. 60 men in a dry ditch with the village awake all round them and their officer face down in the mud at the bottom of it. It stopped in about a minute. Somebody threw a sword down and then all of them did. I got there last, which is where I was for most of that week. They had Aubrey Lance up on his knees at the mouth of the leat with 3 poles on him, and Cass had an arrow at 10 feet, and about 200 people had come down out of the dark and were standing in a ring. And I want to tell you honestly that there was a moment there. There was. Nobody says it. There was a moment when it could have gone the other way, and it was not Cass and it was not Corvin, it was a woman from Long Meg whose name I never learned properly, who said, out loud, in a completely ordinary voice, that they should put him in the river. And the ring moved. About a foot. 200 people took a step in. May stopped it. She came through the front of the crowd in her nightclothes with flowers still on her arms, because May had been baking at 3 in the morning the way she had been baking at 3 in the morning for 6 days, and she got in between Aubrey Lance and the poles, and she did not shout. She said, "Not in my village." That was all. Not a speech. 200 people at 3 in the morning after 6 days, and a woman of 75 in her nightclothes with her back to a man who would have killed her, saying 4 words. The ring went back. We put him and the 60 of them in the wool shed under guard, and Sura went round them and dressed 19 and set 2 arms. And in the morning I went down to the wool shed and I did the thing I have been questioned about more than anything else in my life, and I did not say one word while I did it. I had thought about it all night and I had a speech. I had a very good speech. I had 4 years of it. I had the sand on the summoning floor in the boot on my head and the word empty chalked on a door in Holloway, and I had walked a good many days north with 2 women who had nothing, and I had every intention of saying all of it. And then I came into the wool shed at first light and he was sitting on a bale with his arm in one of Sura's slings and his face in the state it was in. And he looked up at me, and I understood, standing in the doorway, that anything I said would be the most useful thing that had happened to him all week, because a man who has been shouted at has been given something. He can carry it home. He can be angry about it. He can tell it his own way. So I did not say anything. I had them bring his horse to the door. It was a good horse and it was unhurt, and Cinderholm had been feeding it for 2 days. I had Greta put his sword across the saddle bow, cleaned, and the writ with it, folded, unmarked. I had Poppy open the shed doors and I had 200 people not come and watch, which took some arranging and which Belle did. Then I stood aside from the door. He got up. He came out into the yard. He stood there for a long moment looking at the horse and at the sword and at the writ, and then he looked at me, and he waited, and I could see him waiting, and I have never wanted to say anything so much in my life. I did not say anything. He got on the horse. And then he spoke, and his voice was not steady, and this is the only thing that was said in that yard. What am I supposed to tell them? I looked at him. Then I turned round and went back into the wool shed to see about the 60 men who were still sitting in it, and I heard him ride out of the yard behind me, and I did not turn round for that either. He rode 19 miles to Marrow Ford in 12 days to Holloway, and he stood in front of the college and the War Office and the Crown's men, and he told them, out loud, in his own words, in the first person, what had happened to him, that he had taken 240 of the Grey Horse into the northern marches under a crown writ. That he had lost 9 horses and a griffin at a village street to a farmer with a billhook. That the ford had been blown by the people who built it. That he had put 60 men up a dry ditch at 3 in the morning and been taken out of it by a miller with a barrel hook. That there was no summon monster, no weapon, no magic of any kind that he could point to, and that at no time in 6 days had anything happened that could not have been done by 900 people with black powder, a quarry, and a good road. And that he had been given his horse back and his sword and his writ, and had not been spoken to. Not one word, in a yard, with nobody watching. That is the whole of what happened to Aubrey Lance, and it is all I ever did to him, and he told it himself, 4 times, to 4 different bodies of men, over 20 days, because they kept asking him to go through it again. The college withdrew the writ in the autumn. Not out of shame. Out of arithmetic. 240 horse for 6 days, a griffin, 9 horses, and some wounded. Against that, a village with no revenue worth taking and a rock that would need a garrison forever. In a valley where the other 8 villages had walked in to help. In a province that had just started paying tax again for the first time in 100 years, because it had stopped being poor. Mabon Craik wrote that last part into his report himself. He showed it to me first. It is 4 lines long and it is the best thing anybody in this story ever wrote. But that was the autumn, and there is one more morning before it, and it is the one I actually want to tell. Farron Dask had been with the company the whole week. He had sat in a tent at the far end of the valley for 6 days, and he had not been consulted about anything, because a company of horse does not consult a scholar, and I have often wondered what those 6 days were like for him. He came up the river road on foot on the 7th morning, alone, at about 8. He had to walk 2 miles further than he expected, because there was no longer a ford at Bell Rock and he had to go round by Ox Cross and through Draymore. Holder Vosk let him through and sent a boy to walk with him. He came onto the green and stopped and looked at what was there. 940 people, most of them asleep on the ground in the sun after 6 days, and a great many of them not from Senate at all. The school with 9 wounded in it and a woman from the Grey Horse asleep on a bench outside it with her leg splinted. Bread coming out of the ovens. Sura going past with a basin and not looking at him. And the stone. He walked over to it and stood looking down at the ring, and then he crouched and put 2 fingers inside it, exactly the way he had crouched on a floor of white sand 9 years before and put 2 fingers into a chalk circle and ruined my life. He stayed crouched a long time. It is charged. I know. How? 640 people who do not live here slept under our roofs for 6 nights because they were frightened of you, I said, and stopped being frightened while they were doing it. Farron Dask stood up slowly and he had gone quite grey. You are going to spend it? Yes. On one man? Yes. He did not shout. I want to be fair to him to the end. He did not shout and he did not beg and he did not threaten me, and he had every right to do all 3. He said, "Do you know what I would build with that?" I do. I have thought about it every night for a year. I think you would build hospitals. I think you would mean it. And I think in about 30 years there would be a garrison on it and a schedule of draws and a man whose whole job is deciding whose sleep is worth the most, and I think he would be a good man too, and I think it would still be that. Dask looked round the green again. That is not an argument. That is a fear. Yes. It is. That is all I have got. I am 27 and I am not clever enough to have an argument against you. So I am going to do the one thing I know is right instead of the many things that might be, and I am going to do it now, in front of everybody, and you can stand there and watch me and write it down. And then May came over with a cup of tea and gave it to him, because he was 63 and had walked 5 miles, and he took it, and drank it, and he stood there holding the cup with both hands for the next quarter of an hour. I went and got Wilder out of the mill. He had been asleep about 4 hours. He came out with his hair flat on one side and the case under his arm because he had gone back for it in the night the way he always did, and he saw the whole village standing on the green and he stopped in the middle of the path. "What is this?" "The ring is wide." He looked at me. Then he looked at the stone, 40 yards away, with 200 people standing back from it in a circle, and Belle's board with the first drawing of the ring on it laid on the grass beside it for comparison, and Sura standing there with her arms folded and her jaw set, and Ilna, and May, and Farandask holding a cup of tea, and Marcus Wilder, who had been a soldier for 20 years and had taken an arrow through the shoulder and had turned a dung heap with a fork for 18 months and had never once complained about any of it, sat straight down on the path in front of everybody. I gave him a while. "You knew," he said, eventually. "Since the 5th night. Ilna told me not to tell you." He looked over at her. She looked straight back at him. "You would have been careful. We needed you." He laughed at that. It came out wrong. He put the heel of his hand against his eye and left it there for a moment, and then he got up and picked up the case and dusted off the back of his coat and said, "All right." And that was the last time he ever said all right to me, and he had said it about 400 times in 5 years. It took him 2 hours to say goodbye to 900 people and he did not get through half of them. He went to the forge first. Corbinash had his arm in a sling and could not shake hands, and so they stood there, and Wilder put his hand flat on the anvil for a second. And Corvin got out the longest sentence I have ever heard from him. "The second whistler has 4 extra hoops because a man drew a breech plug 11 times on a slate for a smith who could not read a drawing. I would like that put out loud in front of people. It has been now." He went to the hurt house. Sura would not come out for a long time, and when she did she was furious, which is what Sura does instead of crying. And she told him that she had 7 questions she had been saving and that he was leaving before she had asked any of them, and he said he was sorry. And she said sorry was not an answer to any of the 7. Then she put one. "Why does the boiling work?" "I do not know. Nobody where I come from knows either, or if they do they never told me. There are small things in the dirt and the boiling kills them. That is everything I have got and I have given you all of it." Sura said that was not good enough and that she would find out herself, and she has been at it for 2 years. And last winter she wrote 9 pages about it and sent them to a physician at Ferry Bank who wrote back to say it was nonsense, and she has not stopped. He went to the school. Belle had every child who was fit standing in 2 rows and had clearly rehearsed something, and Wilder got about 4 words into whatever he meant to say and then gave up and just went along the rows. Nell Vosk stood on the end of the row. "Is it true that where you come from there are carts that go without horses?" "Yes." "How fast?" "Faster than a bird." "That is a lie." "I know it sounds like one, and it is not." He went to Poppy, last of the young ones, and Poppy had the bell rope in her hands the whole time and did not let go of it. He told her that the kettle was too light and that she was going to have to make Corvin build a heavier bed for it and that she should not let anybody talk her out of it. She said she would not. She never has. He went to May and May gave him bread, wrapped, for the road, which is the single funniest thing that happened that day and which nobody laughed at, and he took it, and he put it in the pack, and it went through with him. "What do you leave, when you have 5 years and 2 hours? He left the fork. It is in the powder shed and Poppy will not let anybody else use it. He left his coat with 9, by post, 3 days later, which means he had arranged it in advance with a wren called Marl and had not told me. He left the little dark tube off the top of the rifle with Sura, and she has it on a stand and every apprentice she has ever trained has looked at the sill through it on their first morning. He left a bootlace with Tib's mother, who had asked him for something, anything, and who would not say why. He left the grey sticky ribbon, about 1/3 of a roll, in Corvin's hand, and Corvin has used 4 inches of it in 2 years and keeps the rest in a box. And he left a list, on a board, in Belle's hand from his dictation, of 9 things he had never got round to teaching anybody. Numbers 3 and 7 are still not done. Number 1 was a windmill for the high fields, which Wictilly finished last autumn. "Is that everything?" "That is everything I have got," he said, and it was not, and everybody in that room knew it was not. He went to Cass and Cass said, "What do I do about the north spoil?" And he said, "Plant it," and she said, "Plant it with what?" And he said, "Anything with roots, in the spring, and it will hold and you will never have to fight for it again, and it is an orchard now." Then he came to me and Ilna said her piece and it was short and it is hers. And then he stood in front of me and he did not have anything, and neither did I. 5 years. Everything I have and everything I built and every single person on that green, and I could not get a word out. So he said it for me. "You never asked me for it. Not once. From the first day. Every man I ever worked for asked me for the shot. You asked me what I needed. He put out his hand and I took it. Do not build anything for a while. You are going to want to. Sit down instead. Then he walked to the stone. The whole village came in a little. Farandask put the cup down on the grass and came in with them. I put my hand flat on the ring the way I had done in a granary yard 5 years before with blood on my face, and I did not have to be angry this time and I did not have to pull, because it was all there. 4 years of roofs and beds and weddings and 6 nights of 600 people sleeping in our sheds, and it came up under my palm like water finding a hole. And the gate opened all the way. It was a door. Wider than a door. It stood in the middle of the green with the whole of Senate round it, and the light coming through it was grey and wrong, and there was cold air pouring out across the grass in the middle of a summer morning. And on the other side there was a road, in the snow, at night, and a car standing on it with its lights on, and one door open, and a wheel off, and a jack, and a man's coat over the wing. Nobody made a sound. 900 people and not one sound. I do not know what they thought they were looking at. I know what Farandask thought he was looking at, because he made a noise, one, not loud, and I have heard it once since from a man being told his wife was alive. Wilder went through. He did not look back and he did not stop in the middle of it and he did not say anything else, because he had said it, and because he had been standing on the wrong side of that door for 5 years and 2 months. He stepped out onto the snow and turned round. He was standing on a road in the dark, in his own country, 4 feet away and unreachable forever, and the snow was going sideways past him, and he lifted one hand, and then it shut. There was no noise. The stone in the middle of our green went cold under my hand between one breath and the next, and the ring went out of it like frost going off a window, and it was granite. It is granite now. It has been granite for 2 years. Children sit on it. May still calls people to bread beside it. It is a rock in a green in a village, exactly as Aubrey Lance said it was, and everything anybody ever wanted from it went through a door on a summer morning in front of 900 witnesses and never came back. Farandask stood there for a long time after everybody else had started moving. I went over to him eventually because somebody had to, and he was looking at the grass where the gate had been, and he said, without turning round, that he had seen it for about 3 seconds. I said I was sorry. Do not be sorry. I have spent 40 years arguing that there is nothing on the other side of an empty gate, and I have just watched a man walk onto a road with a light on it. I am 63. I have 3 seconds and I am going to have them for the rest of my life, and there is not one person in Holloway who will believe a word of it. Then he wanted the teacup back, which was May's, and he had been holding it and had put it down on the grass and could not find it, and I found it for him, and he handed it over and thanked me and walked 5 miles to Marrowford. He wrote 4 books about it. Nobody believes them. He is still at the college and he still holds the chair he offered me, and he is said to be very difficult about the word empty. And there was one thing left on the stone. I did not see it happen. Nobody did. When we came back to it in the afternoon, when the green had emptied and the wounded had been moved and May had started baking again because May bakes, there was one small brass cylinder with a gray point on the end standing upright on the granite in the middle of where the ring had been. He had 34 when he went through. I have counted the story back 100 times and I know he had 34, and there is no possible way he could have set it down without somebody seeing, and it was warm when I picked it up. It is on a shelf in the school. Belle put it there. Every child in the Ash Marches has looked at it, and about half of them think it is a joke and the other half think it is the most important object in the world, and Belle refuses to settle the argument, which I think is the correct policy. Senate has 400 and several people now. There is a mill and a second mill at Long May. There is no ford at Bell Rock, and there is a bridge, which Orenfell paid for out of the Crown's compensation and about which he has never stopped complaining, and which is licensed to the village and not to him, because Greta went to Marrowford about it on the day the writ was withdrawn. There is a shop with 2 glass windows. There is a school with a slate floor and 90 children in it from 8 villages and 3 teachers, and Belle is 60 and will not retire. There is a herd house with 14 beds and 9 girls and 2 boys training under Surah, and people come 3 days to it, and it still charges nobody anything. There are 40-nighter beds in 8 villages and the whole district smells faintly of them in August and nobody mentions it anymore. What else is there? There is a great deal here that has no business being in a valley like this. There is a road from Bell Rock to Coldwater with 5 houses on it now, because 9 finally allowed us to build him a second room. There is a boatyard at the landing run by Spratt, who is 20 and who was the boy on the grey hen. There is a glass shed where Bramble Taro makes bottles that are still green and still full of bubbles and which every apothecary from Sto to Sar now buys. There is a bell foundry, which is Corvin's, and which has cast 14 bells, one of them for Draymore. There is a rope walk. There is a pottery run by Hesta Dole's younger son Webb. There is an inn, the Pink Bird, which Poppy named and which May refuses to enter on principle. There is an orchard on the North Spoil, which has apples and damsons and 16 cherry trees, and Cass planted every one of them with her own hands and will not let anybody prune them. And there is a stone at the top of the ramp with 4 names cut into it. Ru. Hala. Nien. Fun. And below them, added later, in a different hand, because Bell would not have it otherwise, Tib and Kel. Who cut them? Piper Dune cut them. He asked for the work and nobody argued with him and nobody has ever mentioned it since. There is a fair on the shortest day. Last year it was 2,000 people and Nessa Bird came down off the moor at 63 to judge the bread. Cass runs the watch and has 19 people and has not needed them in 2 years. Poppy is the powder mistress and has never once let anybody forget it. Piper Dune runs the mill and married a woman from Kettle Hill. Corvin Ash cannot use 2 fingers of the left hand and has taken 4 apprentices, and one of them is Draymore's. Greta buys and sells and has never in 6 years been beaten on a price by anybody, including her husband. Tessa keeps goats. Pip is 14 and rides the river run. Ren came back down from Coldwater in the second autumn and runs the corning shed, and she and Ilna do not talk about it, and they talk about everything else, and I have decided that is what it looks like when it is worked. Halder Vosk died in the spring. He was 64. Sura was there, and she had been going over twice a week since the autumn, and neither of them ever explained that to anybody. Draymore buried him and Senate went to it, all of us, and May read something Bell had written, and Nell Vosk held my hand through it, and Draymore has a woman as headman now called Auntie Kroll who was married to Rook and who has never once been anything but straight with me. Corvin Ash stood at the back of it and said his brother's name, once, where Greta could hear him, which was the first time in 5 years, and then he walked home and lit the forge and worked until dark. And people came. That is what I did not predict at all, and it started the week the writ was withdrawn and it has not stopped. Where do you go when a valley starts letting people in? You go to it. So they came, and I am going to name some of them, because a place is the sum of who walked into it. A cooper called Odik Vane, out of Sar, with 2 carts and a lathe. A widow named Muriel Boak from a village called Withy Green that a lord had cleared for sheep, with 9 people behind her and no plan of any kind. A collier called Brant Sallow off the Coldwater shafts with a bad chest and the best hands for a fuse anybody has ever seen. 2 brothers, Ivor and Aldous Meek, who dig wells and nothing else and who have dug 14. A man out of Netherby named Orencode who arrived claiming to be a schoolmaster, was not, and is now, because Bell took him apart in an afternoon and then trained him for a year. A girl of 16 from Copple Ford called Hesper Quill who walked in with a broken wrist and a goose named Pardon, and who runs the pony shed, and who has never once explained the goose. And a great many people with no names to give, the way 9 had none, and we stopped asking. There is a second village now at Larkhill on the Sill Road, which has 40 households and its own bakehouse. There is a landing at Sump Lane with a boat called the Corncrake. There is an inn on the Merriford Road called the Blue Mare, run by a man named Dunnock who was a grey horse trooper and who came back in the spring with his pay in his boot and asked whether that was going to be a problem, and it was not. And Ilna and I have a daughter. She is 2. Her name is Rue. I did not build anything for a year after he went. I sat down, mostly, the way he told me to, and it turned out to be the hardest instruction anybody ever gave me and the only one I needed. Because here is what I got wrong for 5 years, and I got it wrong from the first night, sitting on a warm rock with 41 pieces of brass laid out on a cloth in the moonlight and my nose bleeding. I thought the brass was the thing. I spent 5 years measuring my whole life against a number that went down. I built a mill and a ford and a school and a shop and a hospital, a road with 4 houses on it and a post with 9 children on ponies. And every single one of those I built because I thought I was buying ammunition. And on the last morning, when 240 of the Crown's horse came into that valley, the case stayed shut under a meal chest in a mill. We did not fire 1 round. Not one, in 6 days. What actually stopped them was a bog at Ox Cross that Halder Vosk dug because we had put his village in our school. A quarry full of spoil that existed because we had wanted a floor for children to write on. 900 people who came because a woman had boiled a knife for their sons. A dog in a schoolroom. An old woman in her nightclothes saying 4 words. A miller we did not hang. The man came through a hole in the world with a rifle and 34 chances, and he spent 5 years teaching a burnt valley to carry water and lie still and boil the knife, and then he went home, and I have never once in 2 years wished I had the rifle back. I would like the rest of it back. All of it. Every hour. But it is a rock in a green in a village, and there is bread coming out of the ovens, and the school is loud, and that is what it bought. And I would do the whole thing again exactly the same way except for the order I walk people into the sill, and that one I would do differently, and I think about it every day.
So that is the story of a boy everyone laughed at, who opened a door and got nothing, and then opened it again in the mud and got one tired man with a heavy stick. And what I keep coming back to is that the gun almost never went off. He fired 4 shots in 5 years, and none of them on the day it mattered. Everything that actually saved that village was a roof, a school, a boiled knife, a road, and a lot of people who decided to walk in and help. He kept thinking he was buying bullets. He was buying neighbors. When life hands you one big advantage, ask now and then what you are actually building with it, because that is what stays after the advantage runs out.